throttle, victory is mine. Show you the harder the battle, harder I fight. I've come too far to quit. Step back, I'm going in. I'm cranking up on the throttle. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made.
Oh. Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to the renewed Armchair Admirals. It's been a few months, but we are back, and we are back with a new topic, the British battlecruisers. Last year we were talking about battlecruisers already, but we were looking more on the German school. Right now we will be adding British battlecruisers into games, so it makes sense to talk about British battlecruisers, especially since it's around the anniversary of the Battle of Jutland, the anniversary of the hunt for Bismarck. So, yeah, that's a good time for this topic. And I'm not here alone. Obviously, you can already see we have a pretty illustrious guest role today. So, obviously, we have our beloved Prince Blip.
Hello, I'm a community manager for World of Warships Legends. For everybody listening on the World of Warships Legends channel, this is Armchair Admirals, a monthly history PC show or show on for PC World of Warships that we are restreaming to our channels on World of Warships Legends, so that you guys can get another extra dose of history if Friday was not enough for you. So I will be watching the chats for World of Warships Legends for any questions there.
Yes. And then we have, let's start from the middle, Dr. Clark. What's
Hello,
new?
I'm in the middle. Hello, how are you doing? How is everyone? I'm naval historian, of course. I did my PhD at King's College London. I can't think how you would tell that. And yeah, I have my own YouTube channel, and I have a book out as well, in shops and available now on tribals, battles, and daring class destroyers. And my
Yes.
publishers keep sending me notes reminding me to say this more on my channel when I'm on YouTube.
Yes, definitely. I mean, this book has been talked about a lot because it's been. I mean, I can only imagine what the effort goes into writing a book. I had enough trouble with my
Yeah.
thesis, and I guess this is the thesis times 100 about. So
It was fun, let's say that. It was fun.
yes,
We will all say it was fun. Definitely fun.
yeah. So yeah, go and check out the result of the fun. It's definitely worth it. And there's also a very nice artwork on the cover. Next we have Drachinifel. How was your NA trip?
Oh, we've
Oh.
lost sound.
We've lost sound. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yep,
Yes.
that's better.
Yep. Right. Yeah, I was going to say my North America trip was absolutely fantastic. I met in total probably something pushing north of 600 subscribers,
Wow.
which was fun. People kept turning up on all sorts of different ships. Met lots of really excellent museum ship staff as well. And got to see a lot of the efforts that's gone into preserving the ships, and of course got loads and loads of material for loads and loads of content for the future, and made lots of very, very useful contacts from museum ship world, serving military, ex-military personnel. And it's a whole avenue of new things that have opened up, and a few other things which are still remaining a little classified until they go up on the channel live.
Ooh, classified. That sounds nice. Yeah, and obviously for those of you who, for some reason, are new to this channel and new to this chat and did not yet bump into one of Drachinifel's videos on YouTube, which I think if you are interested in warships is probably impossible.
But I'm told by Twitter he's the Dark Lord of naval history. I'm told by Twitter he is now the all-seeing omniscire of the naval history.
So is he a Dark Lord or is he Omniscire? Like
Both.
Apparently both.
both.
I have been informed by someone in a very, very angry, ranty tone of voice that I have complete control and dominance of the naval history sphere online, which, I wish someone had told me that, because that sounds like a lot of power that I could
That's what they all
use.
say.
Yes, we're going to go with use.
Yes. So in any case, if you somehow missed Dragon Rifle's channel, link is around there, and definitely go there. There is a lot of interesting things, among others about battlecruisers. But basically, if it floats and is historical, it's there. If it didn't float, it's probably still somewhere there, at least in a mention. And yeah. And
I think actually for both of us, the most popular videos on our channels are battlecruiser ones. I have an introduction to battlecruisers, which there's all the rest of my videos, which are doing quite well. And there's introduction to battlecruisers, which is sort of astronomical. And I think on Drax channel it's about the same. It's a case of normal. Rest of the videos all very good, very high, and then battlecruiser.
Well, they have a good PR or bad PR depending on the angle, right? But there's no such a thing as a bad PR.
No such thing as bad press.
And last but not least, we have a new guest today. We have Mr. Killerbin, who is also British.
Yes.
And if you don't know him yet, he's a World of Warships community contributor, and he's also quite knowledgeable about all stuff naval, especially British naval. So I think we have a very good setup to talk about British things, and we have the American perspective here as well. So,
The heretic.
I think there will be some rumble going on. And
You think? It depends if he tries to say the Lexington class were actually an exceptional design of battlecruiser.
Oh, I can't
Then
say
he
that
might
in good
find
faith.
himself in trouble.
I can't say
Which
that in good faith.
generation of the Lexingtons is
How many funnels are we talking?
7.
there is only the 7 funnel design. All others are just fakes. There's the 7
least-
funnels or nothing.
At least the 7 funnel design, we will give it to him. At least the 7 funnel design has armor that is in the ballpark for the armament, because that's the 10 gun 14-inch class. It's in the ballpark. Still not good.
Yeah, I mean, at least we.
I'm
are
just.
not-
This is not. The camera hasn't frozen. This is just the idea that any point of the Lexington Archer class actually. They are wonderful scout ships and cruiser killers.
I mean,
But as battle cruisers by 1918, they have a very large 42,000-ton problem in the world.
Can
by
we
1918.
just call them very large cruisers?
No.
That's the point at which you're starting to claim they're the predecessors of the Alaska class at that point.
The
Yeah.
reason I say this is because you're saying by 1918, the 7 funnel design originates in 1916, and at this point in time, basically no armor belt beyond 6 to 7 inches has even been penetrated by a main battery shell. So a 7-inch armor belt at that time is light, but not unreasonable. That's my argument, at least.
I mean, I also wanted to ask, but since we already started talking about the American craziness before we launch into the serious business, could the American designs of torpedo battleships from that era be considered torpedo battlecruisers rather, because they were supposed to be very fast?
Taki, are you just trying to cause us to cause the American to run from the room screaming?
I still want USS Possible in some way.
This is not really fair, and that's before I let Drac open up. I'm doing this to try and be nice and buy Prince Flip time to protect himself, to gird his loins and coat himself in armor before destruction,
Well, speaking
which
of,
I'm not sure where he is in relation to my screen, awaits.
Basically, your camera
More-
is being captured from screen that is directly opposite Prince Blip, so you can virtually reach out and.
if you point above your book,
Do that.
You're pointing
You're
at
I
pointing
feel
at
like I
Prince
should give you an emotional support hug, Prince Flip, before I let Drax start speaking.
well,
And
look,
I've just realised all the images are flipped. So actually, if you want to do it, you'd have to gesture off to your left,
My left.
above your book.
left and up, left diagonal and up.
Yes,
Okay, hello.
like
Yeah, that's it. Prince Blip is above you and to the left. Killer Bin
It
is
will help you, my friend.
directly to your
I'm
left
giving
and
you
onto
some
the right.
support, emotional support.
Yeah.
I'm doing the equivalent of Germany. I'm sending thoughts and prayers.
To be fair, when it comes to American ship design from this era, I think anything is more reasonable than the possible design. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but
Yes.
it has a central barbette that allows it 360 degrees triple super firing, and inwardly basically a turtle back as the armor scheme on the exterior of the ship. It's internal combustion propulsion driven with 5 screws, and it's slated for 28 knots in 1917. 16-inch guns.
How many engines were they planning to jam into it?
All of them.
Yes.
All of them. 5 screws you need.
Like a year's production of Ford Model T's worth of engines?
Like, look,
Only a year's?
look, it was done with tanks, right? You don't have engines for one Sherman variant. You just take 5 lorry engines and pull them together, and you have a engine. I'm still amazed that the only design flaw in that design was the 5 coolant pumps, and that after they replaced that with one center one, this contraption actually worked very reliably. But in any case, yeah, so having trashed the American designs, let's get serious.
Yeah.
Killer Bin, who's that guy behind you?
That is Admiral Sir John Jackie Fisher.
And why is he important?
Because one could argue that this was all his idea to begin with.
Yes.
Or at the very least...
Yeah, apart from there's an Italian, there's a few other British guys, there's a Scottish guy who claims
He's the one who gets them
he's
done, though.
Canadian. Yeah, this is the advantage of being a theorist of steel rather than words. You get to build what you want to think about.
If you have a budget.
Yeah, as I said, Fisher had some crazy ideas, but unlike many, he's got budgets.
Yes. And to be fair, what I will head off before we really get going is one of the things that Fisher sometimes gets quite derided for is saying that speed is armor. And the thing is, at the time that he said that, he was
They
actually
didn't have
correct.
radar.
Well,
They
it's not
didn't have
even
any
just
of
the
the
radar.
targeting practice, you know.
It's the very early mid-1900s fire control equipment physically couldn't cope with ships that went so above about 23, 24 knots. This is one of the many reasons, apart from rate of fire, why the secondary battery, after almost disappearing on Dreadnought, comes back, because they need the casemate armament to deal with small ships that might be going at a particularly high speed. The big gun turrets with all their fire control equipment, whilst they're perfectly good for taking out enemy battleships, are physically incapable of tracking ships that are moving at relatively high speeds. And so a Dreadnought armored cruiser / battlecruiser, the first generation, do have protection against enemy capital ship guns through their speed. The only problem for them is that that's what the case at the time of concept. By the time they're actually built, fire control equipment has evolved, and quite rapidly. So by the time HMS Invincible is commissioned, it's no longer true. But it was at the time that he first said it.
I mean, you're also looking at, he's saying this around 10 years after basically the first quote unquote central fire control system, which was literally a dude standing with a makeshift binocular or makeshift rangefinder on top of a turret on Olympia. And it's that was, this is only 10 years after. We're still getting to where you're having any sort of centralized fire control as a thing on any ships. So these are the very beginnings of accurate fire at anything going at any reasonable speed.
Yeah, which is
Percy Scott is still being quiet and polite at this point.
Yeah.
Yes.
We've
Which
got
is,
indefatigable
like
up,
to-
so I'm now being severely triggered.
Yeah, but I basically put this image here just to demonstrate what we talked about with the fire control, because one thing that you notice on all the pre-World War I Dreadnought battleships is that the masts are kind of elegantly unencumbered with stuff. You have a spotting platform, you have a rangefinder or two, but compared to Let's throw in renown. You already see the World War II, end of World War II suit, and you just see this huge castle of a control tower. You see very much encumbered mast with all sorts of things and all sorts of fire control devices. So, yeah, basically by the time the battlecruisers were conceived, none of this existed. And if you were fast, you can avoid being hit at least some combat distances. So, okay, so by that we probably established that the battlecruisers were supposed to be fast. What else were they supposed to be?
So who wants to take
Pete.
that one?
Pretty. Basically, battlecruisers are supposed to be... Well, how do I put this politely? So, your battleship is the thing which everyone's going to talk about because that's going to fight the actual battles. But if you want to win a war, you want to win the economic war, and that's going to be your battlecruiser. Its purpose is to hunt down enemy cruisers which might be protecting trade and destroy them. But more importantly, it's to absolutely sledgehammer enemy trade. It's to make it so likely, so devastating likely that you're going to lose all your merchant ships, that they're going to be captured by the Royal Navy, that they're going to manage to do a version of the Napoleonic Wars on steroids, that frankly you don't go to sea and you give up. Now, you always have to remember there's a small problem with Jackie Fisher building battlecruisers. The fact is, the main person who he could build a battlecruiser against is not Germany, because in any war versus Germany, you're going to be bottling them up anyway, and any trade is going to have to get past your ships anyway to get to Germany, unless you want to put a battlecruiser into the Baltic, which you're unlikely to want to do. Battlecruisers are not weapons for war against Germany. That's what you have the battle fleet for. Battlecruisers are weapons for war against the wider world. So that is the sort of thing. When Jackie Fisher is building battlecruisers, you have to wonder which enemy he's really thinking about. Is he thinking about fighting France, who he really doesn't like? Is he thinking about potentially threatening America, which he finds annoying on occasion, but actually quite enjoys and finds the frankness of Americans mostly interesting? Or is he thinking about Japan? Or is he thinking about some other combination of powers who he will have to deal with large economic lines? Because again, the battlecruiser doesn't make sense unless you're doing that. Now, you can then turn around and go, well, hang on, it's to defend the British commerce. And you can go, yes. But again, German battlecruisers don't exist when Britain builds battlecruisers. And the German battlecruisers would have to get out past Britain again. So that's not exactly going to be a fun thing for them to do. Mm-hmm. And it's going to kind of cramp their style range-wise. But they still, if they got into British trade, that would be problematic. So ultimately, the battlecruisers are... The battleship, HMS Dreadnought, is his statement to the world that your ships don't matter. But the battlecruisers are his knife to everyone's necks for global trade.
Well, one of the things to bear in mind is, of course, that when the battlecruiser is first built, it's not actually called a battlecruiser, it's called a dreadnought armoured cruiser, which is partly accurate, partly also sleight of hand, because everyone's just seen the dreadnought battleship built, and everyone's looking at that going, oh, okay, so it's a big battleship, granted, but it's a battleship that's effectively taken the same guns as the previous battleships, except it's now lots of them and no secondary battery. And, I mean, to the extent that Dreadnought is completed using guns off of the Lord Nelson class, they are literally identical weapons. And so everyone's looking at they don't know exactly what Invincible is going to look like, and they're thinking, okay, so it's going to be a Dreadnought armoured cruiser. So logically following that, they look at the previous generation of British armoured cruisers, which has a mixed 9.2 and 7.5 inch battery, and they go, right, so it's going to capitalise on the big guns, so it's going to be an all 9.2 inch armoured cruiser, and it's probably going to have to be relatively big to fit the 9.2 inch guns, which is why the Germans start building Blücher, which is actually a Dreadnought armoured cruiser. It's an armoured cruiser armed with their biggest armoured cruiser weapons. And then it turns out that actually what Jackie Fisher meant was, no, we're taking Dreadnought battleship guns and putting them on an armoured cruiser hull. But the original intention of the Invincibles and the Indefatigables was primarily to do with trade. So one of the big problems that the British were worried about was, with the fact they were concentrating their fleet against Germany, it also meant they're having to concentrate large numbers of their cruisers to form a fleet screen for the Grand Fleet, because bear in mind, something the size of the Grand Fleet hadn't existed for pretty much ever, actually. The Grand Fleet was a concentration of the majority of the British fleet's battle strength. Even going back as far as the Age of Sail, you'd had a Channel Squadron, a North Sea Squadron, a Mediterranean Squadron, and so on and so forth, and they'd been varying between fleets and squadrons for the past couple of 100 years. But even at the Battle of Trafalgar, the Battle of Trafalgar represents a small fraction of the total number of British ships of the line that are available across the planet. So the Grand Fleet is this brand new thing, and it's drawing in a huge amount of the Royal Navy's cruiser assets. And they realised that with the battleship building program and all of these other fleet screen assets brought in, it's no longer physically possible to have enough cruisers deployed across the world that you can face off against all the enemy's potential commerce raiding cruisers. So the solution seems to be the Dreadnought Armoured Cruiser, because the way its Invincible is designed is that it's got guns that can reach out and kill any cruiser, whether it be a protected cruiser or an unarmoured cruiser, and it can do that beyond the range that that cruiser can effectively reply. They can shoot back, but at the distance that the battlecruiser can maintain, it will just bounce off the battlecruiser's armor, or the Dreadnought Armoured Cruiser's armor. And that's why the armor doesn't have to be particularly thick, because it's got the speed to maintain that range. It's faster than pretty much anything else out there that calls itself a cruiser. There's a few very small protected cruisers that are quicker, but to be honest, if you're taking a ship with 4.1-inch guns up against something that, where its secondary battery is bigger than that, you're probably on a hiding to nothing. And so this is the original role. You use them to mop up the enemy's cruiser formations, and then you use them to target the enemy's commerce, or vice versa, depending if the enemy has many cruisers. And that's the original design role of what will later be called the battlecruiser. There's some talk at the beginning of the fact that armoured cruisers, at least in the pre-Dreadnought era, were also supposed to back up the battle line if you were short on capital ships, like the Japanese do at Tsushima. But even when they do look into that possibility, it's not a case of, first battle squadron, second battle squadron, first battle cruiser squadron, all in a nice line. They're designed to be on the wings. So they're designed to either close off an enemy route of escape or to harry a retreating enemy. They're not supposed to just sit there and slug it out man to man with someone else with equal sized guns in good condition. That all comes later.
And I would say there's sort of an evolution going on there, because whilst I will agree with the Dark Lord of naval history, it does come to that point at a certain point. I actually think when Fisher's building it, he's not thinking about Grand Fleet at all, because honestly, the Grand Fleet starts to come about more as a concept. He has an idea for a Grand Fleet, but it's not where the Grand Fleet's going to be. In many ways, it's more sort of a home fleet scenario, and it's not got all the cruisers and all the assets into it, because at that point, because they aren't really thinking that through. That's something which evolves between 1905 to 1910, 11. So at this point, it sort of takes a while for it to get there. Whereas, well, how do I put this? When it starts out, it is a very useful thing for the British to remind the rest of the world, whilst they are concentrating on the German threat, that they are the world power. And that is something you have to think about. We often talk about in terms of superpowers these days, because we associate being the most powerful nation with having nuclear weapons and having those sort of weapons. In the 1900s, in the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, and early and definitely 1940s, it's a world power that matters. It's who can reach around the world and affect the most things, who can impact the world most, who can dictate world norms in terms of trade. Those are what will give you the real power as a nation. And at this point, battlecruisers definitely seem like Dreadnought armored cruisers, later battle cruisers space between the battle and the cruiser, and eventually after the press gets involved, battle cruisers one word, which is a terrible, terrible thing to start lambering these poor ships with, because as Drac has already said, they were not armored for battle. Are the crucial role in that. They are global reach, and that's also why to the extent you see the Royal Navy pushing so many battle cruisers at the end of World War One. Because after World War One, what have they done? They've defeated the Germans, which were their main battle fleet threat, and their main focus on that. They're going for battle cruisers because they're now looking at it, okay, what are potential threats, what potential conflicts we're going to have to deal with post-World War or post this war. They're all going to be global wars. They're all going to be economic wars. They're going to be presence and deterrence wars. And for that, a high-speed fleet of battle cruisers which turn up and can basically cause trouble wherever they need to in the world are the perfect thing for the world power.
And you end up with I guess I would call it there are 4 stages of British battlecruiser design up until the early 1920s. So you have Invincible and Indefatigable as classes. So they are the dreadnought armored cruisers. They're
Just
commerce
putting
killers,
them on,
commerce raiders.
Putting them on screen as you speak.
Then we get on to the Splendid Cats, which are bizarrely named because only 2 of them are named after cats. The other 2 are Queen Mary and Princess Royal, and they're obviously Lion and Tiger. And it basically,
Have you ever seen princesses fight? The school of the cat fight is to be polite, is to be actually quite kind to cats.
I wouldn't want to mess with Princess Anne, I'll tell you that much.
No, a nice way, no.
I use this analogy on the channel sometimes. There's a basic playground game where everyone puts their hands in one on top of the other, and then the person at the bottom puts their hand on, and then eventually, very quickly, it just evolves into a massive slap fight. This is basically what's going on with battlecruiser design, because the Germans build Von der Tann and the Moltkes and Seydlitz in response to the British building the Indefatigables and Invincibles. So the Germans are now looking at from a position of these ships already exist, we need to build to counter them and other things. That then leads the British to go, oh, okay, right. So now we now need to build what are now battle cruisers in the context of there are potentially other battle cruisers out there. Hence we get Queen Mary, Tiger, Lion, and Princess Royal. So that's kind of your second generation.
I will just quickly jump in here because many people might feel very familiar at seeing the Tiger. Because they probably know the Congos already.
Yes. There is a bit of a debate that goes on about does Tiger or Congo influence the design of the other? Some people call the Tiger a British Congo. Some people call the Congos Japanese Tigers. It's actually a much more mundane thing than that. Tiger and Congo are approximately contemporaneous in terms of design. Not 100%, but they're roughly on a par. They're also being designed and built by the same shipyards. So
yeah, they just kind of put some tracing paper over one of them and kind of went, that'll do.
Yeah. The British are looking for what's the latest and greatest in battlecruiser design. Out comes Tiger armed with a 13.5-inch gun, because that's what current British battlecruisers and battleships are armed with. The Japanese go to exactly the same shipyards and say, what's the latest and greatest in battlecruiser design? Also, we'd like a 14-inch gun, please. The Vickers salesman must have been so happy. And out comes Congo, because they're basically they're drawn from the same design lineage, but because they're almost, not quite, but almost designed in parallel, it's not that someone's gone this one but this, or that one but the other. As Killiban said, it's kind of they've gone, here is our standard for this is what current year modern battlecruiser design is. Quick, make a few changes with some tracing paper. We'll sell 2 different flavors.
The optional extras.
Yeah. So that's kind of your second generation of battlecruiser design. Then you have a third generation, at least in my view, of battlecruiser design, of which we only see one class built by the British, which is the Admiral class, aka Hood. And that's a very different ship, because at that point the British give up what they've been doing with Tiger, which is trying to match what they think the next generation of enemy battlecruiser is going to be. With Hood, literally the design spec is, what was our last good battleship, the Queen Elizabeth's? We want those guns, we want that level of protection, we just want it faster. Which is where a lot of the arguments about whether or not Hood is a fast battleship come in, because that is literally the design spec. They end up going with inclined 12-inch instead of vertical 13-inch.
I will just quickly
protection in theory.
I will just quickly show the difference. So this is the Queen Elizabeth armor scheme. You can see exactly what the Jack mentioned. So vertical armor. Unfortunately, they are not to scale regarding thickness, but here you can see the Hood's main difference.
Yeah.
So sloped armor and incremental free belts.
Yep.
And
then we get after that we get the 4th generation of battlecruiser design, which doesn't actually get built, which is the Alphabet series. So K3, I3, J3, G3, etc. Obviously, a bunch of which are soon to grace the screens of World of Warships, and these ones are a little bit weird in that they actually revert slightly. So they're not specifically designing them against enemy battle cruisers per se, although the Lexingtons and the Amagis and their immediate design predecessors are obviously around, but they are trying initially. It starts off as kind of a halfway house between the Splendid Cats and Hood, in that they're trying to maintain the same level of armament. So if you look at the very early battleship and battlecruiser pairs, they're both armed with 18-inch guns, and they're trying to go, okay, our battleship has 18-inch guns, our battlecruiser has 18-inch guns, they have the same number of 18-inch guns, only the battlecruiser is faster but trading off a bit of armor, which is what most people tend to think of in terms of battlecruiser design. And then it turns out that actually you can't do that and fit these ships either into the budget or into quite a few British docks. And so the armament starts to drop as well. So you end up with effectively your 4th generation of battle cruisers in the British design parlance, which have good protection but not as heavy as the battleships, good weapons but not as heavy as the battleships. And so this is the first time that armament has actually departed in caliber from contemporary battleships, and the one thing they have is speed. But none of those ever actually see the light of day. The G3s get laid down immediately before the Washington Treaty, but of course cancelled by it, and everything else was just paperware.
Yeah, and you got to keep in mind, so this is happening like in the 1919 onward, more or less, and the British know by this time they had shared some engineers with the United States during the war, and they know the Americans are basically barking up a wrong tree with the Lexington class. Because their engineers had shared documents with, or at least insights of what Hood was going to be with the Americans, and the Americans based a lot of their design, including the adoption of an angled belt in the Lexingtons, on the British documents. And then, but Britain knew, or the Royal Navy knew, that that was not going to be much of a competition, at least in the first few iterations of the US versions.
And it went even further than that because, what was it? The director of naval construction who went to the States, he even designed the Americans an American Hood.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, he drew one for us.
With-
Oh, really?
It's in
12,
spring
yeah,
size.
with 12 16-inch guns, 30 knots, I believe it was. But by that point, the Lexingtons had progressed to the point where I think one had even been laid down or was going through like the Senate confirmation for budgetary reasons. So, yeah, as you say, like from the Royal Navy's perspective, we knew in broad strokes what the Americans were doing. So we're like, okay, so they've committed to the invincible style of ship and gone, that's less of a problem. Whereas the Japanese, like, they're already making their battle fleet faster during the war. The Congos are their battle cruisers. The Fusos and the Issei's are unusually quick for their generation. Then the Nagatos appear, and the Keys and the Tosas and the Imagis, and the number 13s and such, those sorts of designs, like, arguably one could say that it's Japan that pushes the sort of homogeneous fast fleet,
Yes.
whereas the British and Americans maintain the heavy and slow, fast and light mix-up.
Yeah, I mean the Americans especially were really caught up in maintaining the standards, right? The 21 knot battle line.
Yeah, the American Hood here is drawn in 19. It's in 1918. It's in the Spring Styles Volume 1. And it says, following data furnished by Captain McBride and Commander Goodall. And Stanley Goodall becomes DNC later on in the early 30s, if I remember right.
Yeah, he's DNC
Yes.
along with Henderson's third Sea Lord.
Yeah.
And he's basically the two of them are the ones who build the Royal Navy for World War II.
Yeah.
Right.
We have
And the ones who complain they could have built a far better ship than King George V.
we have a quick question here from Kismet in the chat. Considering the evolution of ships moves so fast, did they have ships that were started but never finished because they were already outdated before finished? So not probably, I don't think he means cut for budgetary reasons, but just cut or significantly reworked because, hey, this isn't going to work.
The other three admirals kind of skirt this. Hood is accelerated in construction partly because of the losses of Jutland. But they pause the construction on the other three admirals to try and fully redevelop the design. Because Hood's already been started, so there's a limited amount they can do with her. But they want to make the other three admirals the full lesson from Jutland ships. But while they're doing that, between that, the war ending, etc., by the time they've actually got a design they're happy to progress with, although actually the other three are part way through construction, the Admiralty take a look and go, actually, by the time we finish these things, everything will have moved on, because by that point the Nagatos are known to be planned. The Americans are going to build the Colorados, so they're now going, okay, we need to actually stop this and start again. So you actually there is one intervening design series between the revised Admirals and the Alphabet series, which is Battlecruiser 1919, which survives only as a series of scattered notes in the National Archives, but actually has a fairly extensive testing done to it.
So we might find something in Greenwich, if we go check that. But one of the interesting things about the Admiral class, and I do sometimes bring this up, is the fact that thanks to Admiral Beatty, we have one of the most stupid decisions ever made to mankind when it comes to them. There was a decision: shall we convert the Admiral class into aircraft carriers, or shall we convert Courageous and Glorious? Can we all please have a moment's silence for the idea of what the British conversions of two Admiral class battlecruisers into carriers would have been like for World War II, and would have been like for the Royal Navy in interwar years in development of naval aviation?
Well, that would be definitely that would be a Royal Navy equivalent of the Lexingtons or of Akagi and Kaga, like a huge ship with a lot of space to grow, because that's like.
Although, given the converted everybody's first full-size fleet carrier obviously being converted, you look at the Americans obviously have Lexington and Saratoga. The Japanese end up with Akagi and Kaga after Amagi catches the Great Kanto earthquake to the face. They would have been great in peacetime. Based on the track record of what would have been their contemporaries, I don't hold out too much hope for their survival. That particular group of carriers has a 75% fatality rate.
Yes. And the RAF hoarding all the
Saratoga
planes.
would not survive for lack of trying by the enemy.
But I think that they were kind of very.
Yeah, but let's be honest, Courageous and Glorious didn't survive either, so I'm not going for a survival game.
That's true. No, but I think that where they would come in handy, I'm not now sure how large were the Glorious and Courageous, but they were, I think, smaller than the other conversions, right?
Because
I think that the scale of the Lexington, Saratoga, Kaga, and Akagi helped a lot the navies with like experimenting even and growing the planes, because they were not constricted by the flight deck, basically.
So it is fair to call Courageous and Glorious treaty compliant. it is
Mhm.
not fair to call the others.
Yeah.
No.
True.
Yeah. You see, the Courageous and Glorious were both roughly, let's be honest, 25,000 tons standard. The others weren't.
Yes.
Oh. And
Yeah.
I have here a question highlighted by our trusty and hiding in the background Just Check, who's did a wonderful job at setting up the screen because the stream because 5 speakers is not the usual format, so we lost many of the scenes in the times past. So a question from Yamato 8125206. Oh.
I
Question.
want to ask Drakenfell or Dr. Clark, which battlecruiser propulsion engine was best, coal or fuel?
Yes. I guess the answer here is clear, right?
Yeah, for a battlecruiser. Although coal does have an advantage, you could find it in more places around the world.
Yes.
Let's be honest, oil is going to give you a lot more speed and a lot more
Yeah.
power.
Yeah.
And most of all, coal doesn't clog up your engines so much and isn't so requiring a lot of heavy stuff being moved, like a lot of solid stuff.
I've got an interesting
And I'm
question.
gonna share. Can I share the next question with Drac because my
Yes.
brain's currently gone dead? Hi, Dr. Clark from Hot Sauce Sick. Hello. Can you tell me the name of the secret operation that consisted of a lot of blueprints and military tech from the UK to USA? And I have it on the top of my head, but I cannot actually remember.
The Tizard mission?
Yes.
Yes,
Tizar,
it was.
Yeah.
Tizard
That
Yeah.
was
mission.
that
The
was
mag-
I
sharing-
kept wanting to call it the Blizzard mission and going, it's not the Blizzard mission. I know that. And brain work.
I mean, that was among others sharing of the radars and even of the
Yeah.
GCI, right? The ground
Yeah,
control
radar.
sensor
That
program.
was the radar stuff.
Yeah.
I think going back to the question about ships that were started and then got cancelled because they were felt that they were unsuitable. I can't think of any that were cancelled directly, but the one that screams to me is Blucher.
Mm.
She's built as essentially a prototype heavy cruiser.
Yep.
Had she had turbine propulsion, she would have probably been able to go toe to toe with an Invincible. She suffers at Dogger Bank because she's still stuck with triple expansions, and being tail end Charlie gets the ever living crap beaten out of her. But
Is
World War One German ships can take a hell of a beating.
Isn't one of the
Well,
troubles
it helps
before
when it
Blucher
helps
is
when the
that she's sort of
fuses aren't
undermined.
actually working.
And it's one of the troubles that these ships, and I always find this a bit of a cruelty when we do the comparisons, because you're comparing different fleets, etc., and they have very different maritime infrastructure levels. And that's the thing. For Britain, building turbine ships and converting to a turbine fleet is comparatively easy, because we have so many turbine manufacturers, and we have good ones. We have Parsons and we have Browns. America has fairly good ones. Germany has issues.
Licensed, aren't they?
Hmm?
At the start. They're licensed because it. Oh, what's the name?
That's what they do. They basically
Brown
spend their
and
entire
someone.
time licensing British ones.
They licensed
Yeah.
the Parsons, if I remember right.
Mm.
I've got an interesting question here from the Legends guys. Given the need for speed and other factors, would a run of admirals be more useful to the British than the Nelsons in the future? So say they argue somehow that they can get 2 admirals instead of the 2 Nelsons by saying we don't get 16-inch guns, but we get 2 admirals that are bigger, or something like
Now
this.
that would have been interesting. Technically, yes, because, but it's something that is very easy to say with hindsight. Because when you look in hindsight, neither Nelson or Rodney ever took an impact from a battleship main caliber gun, although Bismarck came close.
Bismarck certainly wasn't for lack of trying on Rodney.
No.
But what that means is that any argument you want to make about the fact that Hood's armor scheme is appreciably weaker than the Nelsons, but in hindsight it wouldn't actually matter because it would on the other 2 it would never be tested. Of course, that's assuming that absolutely everything goes exactly the same as it did historically, which is not a safe assumption to make because, for example, when Rodney nearly catches Gneisenau, if Rodney was a Admiral class, she would have caught Gneisenau.
definitely.
So that would have been a battle that didn't happen historically.
And
so
in the chase for Bismarck, I guess it wouldn't be King George V outrunning Rodney, but the other way around. But
yeah. I mean, it's. I think looking back in hindsight, yes, a pair of effectively fast capital ships probably would have been more useful, but it would have been an almost impossible thing to foresee at the time.
Yep.
Although the other thing I would mention is that I know we mentioned about Hood popping over along with Goodall in the late 1910s to go and see the Americans. And this is another thing which gives you some idea of how Hood was rated at the time she was built. The US Navy did an evaluation of Hood, and they actually scored all of their existing capital ships and projected future capital ships in terms of their lethality, their endurance, etc. And then they scored Hood using the same system. And Hood was actually a huge kind of, bull in a china shop or brick through a window for American ship design, because they looked at Hood and they went, hang on a minute, this is what the British are calling a battlecruiser. According to our own scoring system, the only ships in our fleet that are actually capable of 1v1ing Hood with any chance of success are the Colorados, and that's with a very big asterisk after them, because of course Hood can choose whether or not she fights the Colorado. Colorado can't decline an engagement with Hood.
Yep.
And that's the US Navy's own evaluation of things. There's not the British grandstanding or anything, and that's one of the reasons why, one of the many reasons why the Lexington class undergoes a huge radical redesign within the scope of what they have available to them. And it also, to a certain degree, influences what would have come after the Lexingtons and the South Dakotas as well. So Hood is treated by everybody as a very big threat. And so in hindsight, a pair of admirals probably would have been more useful for the Royal Navy. I deeply, deeply suspect that, one, the Americans wouldn't have let it happen, because at least, although the Nelsons are more heavily armed and more heavily armored, at least they're within the scope of the standard class battle line to bring to battle, even if they're a fraction faster. But secondly, the one area where they might not have been quite as good for the Royal Navy is that as long as the Royal Navy is abiding by the treaty system, a fully loaded Hood or Admiral is going to be adding 10,000 tons a ship to the total capital ship displacement that the Royal Navy has, which means 20,000 tons total extra displacement, which effectively rules out a capital ship, a battleship, in terms of future construction. Now, that's probably not going to make too much odds going forward until you get to the time to rebuild the Royal Navy, because when you get the King George V being laid down, having 2 extra admirals, almost certainly the Royal Navy will have had to have scrapped an extra vessel, probably one of the Renowns, maybe an R class, but they would have had to get rid of. They would have had to get rid of one of them to comply with the treaty displacement limit. So they're one capital ship down. And since the King George V were designed with the treaty restrictions in mind, they would have only ordered 4, not 5. So for the mid to late war period, the Royal Navy would be down 2 capital ships compared to historically where they actually were.
However, I actually would change the question, I have to admit, because the admirals aren't in construction by that point. Yes, they could be converted to a carrier. Yes, that was considered, but the fact is the G3s under construction. So the more interesting thing is, if the Royal Navy's allowed to complete 2 G3s, and maybe they turn the other 2 ones into 2 G3s into aircraft carriers, and again, designs for both have been supplied to me by my very nice subscribers, and I've put them up in a recent video, which is going live on my channel at some point while I'm in Canada. And the point is, if you have 2 G3s completed, then those are the 16-inch guns which the RN gets the Nelsons for. But those are very, very potent ships. And yes, they are going to have the same tonnage issues as Drac has pointed out. But if we consider some points in the treaty, there were allowances made, especially in the Washington Treaty, for those issues, and for ships to be built of a larger and various other status, and Hood herself was skitted by. So if that was put in a scenario, then you have 2 G3s, and I think even if I did lose another ship, if I have 2 G3s and Hood in service as my battlecruisers, and I have Renown and Repulse, and I end up in World War II at some point, then I'm probably not that unhappy, because let's be honest, I'm mentally going through the stats of the Germans, and anything pretty much prior to Tirpitz doesn't stand that much of a chance versus a G3, and I'm not really going to rate Tirpitz that highly versus a G3, because whilst, yes, they have the turret, which I think is the most pointless turret known to mankind, and is probably the one that shouldn't have been in there, they do have 16-inch guns, and they do have a lot of firepower.
Just again to demonstrate where the turret was, look between the funnels and the forward superstructure.
So we have to look at this most pointless turret known to mankind? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It can't... Look, you don't have the turret off because it causes efficiency issues with terms of your inside your hull and keeping your magazines cool versus the boiler rooms, etc. Fine. Then stick the turret forward and have an all-forward arrangement. Don't do that where it's literally sitting there between superstructures and is pretty much the worst position of gun you... Why? Why? And
think of the money the
please
porthole
stop
makers would make.
distressing me. You're distressing me. Oh, they're just wrong.
At that point, calling it the forward superstructure and not the bell is being generous.
There are. I was just gonna call it the tower. That superstructure. It's a case of, and you could flip that round and could have made it sort of almost Nelson style, or could have made it the far better F3 style, which has the super firing C turret and A and B both lower, and that would have been a far better arrangement, and it wouldn't be so distressing for my eyes.
I'm sorry to have made you all look at it. I consider it fair play after being shown the Blackburn.
Are fine. Killerbren and Drakenfell are fine. It's me who's so distressed. I'm not sure. Actually, Drakenfell might have reached the fugue state after looking at it.
I mean, to be fair, this is how you prove that me and Dr. Clark are not in fact the same person. Internet rumors to the contrary, and apart from the fact that we're both here at the same time, I actually quite like the G3 designs. But then that's because chaos and disorder appeal to me greatly, whereas Dr. Clark has a slightly finer sense of the aesthetic. So the more hectic and mad it looks, the more I like it. That's why I'm a great fan of Kearsarge in the game, because nothing says absolute lunacy than a flight deck strapped between two ends of an Iowa. So I'm just like, yeah, fantastic. Let's go, boys. No one can tell what we're doing when we don't know what we're doing either.
But I have to say that the Gibson Cox design proves that even though Soviet Navy didn't have that good track record in building battleships and whatnot, they at least recognized impractical, like utterly impractical design when they saw one.
Yeah. Well, it should be noted as well that the Kearsarge we have in game is the most reasonable of them.
Yes.
Yes.
Because there's also an 18-inch gun version, and a version with 2 triples and a quad.
Yeah, you haven't put a Tillman 4.2 in either.
Nope.
Is that sextuple?
Yeah, that's the sextuple turret.
No,
I can never remember my Tillmans.
4.2 is the 15, 18-inch, I think.
But just so that we can look at something aesthetically pleasing for a change, I've put in also the incomparable D ship that was probably supposed to put battle into battlecruiser and cruising into battlecruiser as well, right?
It was only supposed to be the world's leader for about 3 or 4 years, he thought, before it would be replaced. And yeah, basically, that thing, if it had been built, would have caused the entire American Congress to commit probably harry-kiri over the naval budget they'd have to pass to match it. It would be one way to cause a lot of US politicians a lot of distress. It would probably cause a lot of Japanese politicians to basically cry. and probably would have caused the French and the Italian navies to go, "Oh, Lord Lubaduck," probably, or variations of in Italian and French.
Well, they probably would have very rapidly gone back on the design on the Francesco Caracciolo's to the triple turret design to get
Or-
12,
Well,
12
I think
15 inch.
the Americans might have actually built that Tillman we were just discussing.
Yeah. I mean, Italians
That would
could
have
have.
actually persuaded them to do that.
I mean, Italians could have also decided to just push for the project of damming the Strait of Gibraltar and drying out the Mediterranean Sea.
Probably would have been cheaper.
Yeah.
Okay, so we went over the history of Royal Navy battlecruisers basically from the start to the end. So how did they actually do in practice? What I mean, they took part in a lot of engagements, but which of these engagements, for one, did fit the intended battlecruiser role, and how did they do in those?
The Falklands,
So you-
they do exactly what they're meant to do.
Yeah, you've got
They-
Falkland, and you've got first and second Heligoland Bight as well, which is near enough them doing what they're supposed to be doing. Although, as Killabin says, Falklands is by far the best example. So, shockingly enough, ships that fight the battles they're designed to fight do fairly well, and then you send them up against ships they're not designed to fight, and they tend to do relatively badly. The ships that are designed to be the cruiser killers work very well when they're killing cruisers. The ships that are designed to fight against the enemy battle cruisers, i.e. the Splendid Cat generation, see, at the one hand you have Queen Mary, which just goes boom, but that's far more likely down to dodgy ammunition handling practices than anything else, because Lion almost goes boom, but one difference in whether or not a magazine is flooded means she doesn't, although she is quite badly worked over. Princess Royal comes out of the scrap mostly okay, and Tiger, which, okay, it's a different layout, but fundamentally is not that much removed from Queen Mary. Tiger takes a heck of a battering and basically comes out of it fine. I mean, we've said earlier, German ships at Jutland proved to be quite the tough cookie, but Tiger takes as many, if not more, hits than many of the German battle cruisers, and keeps on trucking, is technically ready for combat the next day. So there's this whole dichotomy across the Splendid Cat era of everything from explodes to unusually tough. And then you get onto the last three that are actually built, which obviously Renown, Repulse, and Hood, where Hood is the big mean one, and of course goes pop at Denmark Strait. Repulse is the oldest one, basically plays torpedo beats against the Japanese for a couple of hours before eventually succumbing to a pincer attack.
19.
And then Renown, which ostensibly is a much less powerful unit than Hood, quite merrily sees its way dancing through World War II, seeing off all and sundry, up to and including taking on both Scharnhorsts and making them run away.
And I would just add to that, I would say Tiger, it's either very lucky for either the fact that Beatty was such an unlucky person made his ship lucky because it sucked all the bad luck out of the room, or alternatively, it was very unlucky for the UK that Tiger stayed afloat because that meant Beatty was still alive, or a couple of shells could have just, I don't know, hit the flag bridge.
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of other people who would be affected by that, but if it's taken out Beatty, we can all discuss. Not that me and Drac have personal plans to build a time machine just to deal with Admiral Beatty. Just we haven't started working on designs or various things.
That's what they all say.
Yeah.
And that's where we're going.
The thing I would add with Repulse though is that's often forgotten about her is at that during the battle where she sunk with the aircraft, she dances like, if you're in the UK it's called Strictly Come Dancing, in the US it's called Dancing in the Stars, in the rest of the world it's variations on them, but we all have seen it where you've got this young football star who's supposed to be this professional, really sort of professional lead athlete, who can barely move 2 feet, and is sort of there dancing away. And then there's usually this professional female dancer in her early 30s who is really experienced, really good, and is basically twirling everywhere around, throwing every trick from all her years of experience, all her funny, everything into it, doing everything she can to make this clod pole look good. We've all seen it because we all got at some point relatives who are interested in it. I live with 2 who are obsessed with Strictly Come Dancing. That is what it is like in the sort of the death throes of 4C. You have got Prince of Wales being this footballer, mostly because she's damaged early on, but also because the Admiral and the captain in her seem to place a lot of faith in their guns. Whereas Repulse does all these twirls, all these things. There is no way she should survive as long as she did, but if you were actually doing it as a movie, and you didn't know the outcome, and you saw her get hit in the end, you would think that the writers had written it in just to have a surprise ending. Because you'd be seeing this ship dancing and avoiding this and this and this and performing way beyond what she was supposed to be designed to and way beyond what you'd expect to show this age to do. And it's almost a case of, she didn't deserve that.
The Japanese sacrificed several bombers to get her too.
Yes.
The hammer and anvil attack that finally got her, I think it's 3 Bettys. They don't kamikaze, but they attack her with the intent of not coming out of it. They're going to land their torpedoes come hell or high water, and they do, but they get shot down for it.
Yeah.
And when you consider that Repulse had the weakest AA fit of any of the 3 battle cruisers,
absolutely.
Yeah.
It was what, like at least 19 torpedoes dodged, and I think I think Captain Tennant takes the helm and does it all himself, right?
Yes.
He described it as rather exciting.
Yes.
I can see that. By the way, speaking of engagement, who came up with the idea of the 4.4-inch guns?
Oh no.
So someone with far less sense than they actually thought they had. I mean, in a way, the 4.4-inch makes perfect sense because the 4-inch gun is a fast-firing weapon. It's got about the right shell weight to deal with destroyers. They're a little bit on the edge on that one. They prefer the 6-inch as an individual gun because, I mean, that's what's on casemates on battleships at the time. But then somebody comes up with a bright idea. Well, we've got the rate of fire with the 4-inch, so what if we just had more of them? And then the weight of fire, basically the broadside of a twin or triple mount, might equal or exceed that of a 6-inch gun. And, 3 shells flying through the air, one of them might hit. It's statistically more likely than a single 6-inch shell, especially when you start firing out lots and lots of them. So everyone's like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's build a 4.4-inch mount and stick it on everything. You should see some of the... there's a really nice model in the Fleet Air Arm Museum of HMS Furious in her first iteration, and there's 4.4s everywhere. And then it turns out that actually, no, it doesn't work that way.
You can't reach the middle gun.
Yeah. The individual 4-inch is a rapid-fire weapon. The 4.4-inch is an incredibly slow-firing weapon.
You've got the crews for the both outer guns that are working fine because they're acting as basically singles, and then the center gun crew essentially all have to stand in a line and pass the shells through because you only have enough space to fit one person at the gun.
No, that doesn't work.
It's an idea which only really works once you are either dealing with guns which are big enough, you're going to have space, or when you have autoloaders in place. And that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
There is actually a question which has been sent through on the sort of the chat on which I've got in front of me, which is, can they discuss the advantage or disadvantages of the different sized turrets?
I was going
twins
there, yes.
versus triples and quadruple. I guess that's where you were going.
Yes.
Tuki. And pretty much, okay, so your number of turrets thing comes down to survivability of your guns. The British stick with twins and multiple guns because that keeps them survivable. And that's what the British have going, and that's what the British are sort of pushing. And I can hear myself talking back to myself somehow. And so they keep pushing through that. But if you are the Germans, you keep with twins because your industry is straining as it is to do what it's doing. And if you're the Italians, you do actually start pushing for triples. The Russians go for triples because the Italians sell them the design, and it works very well, thank you. The French oscillate around all over the place. And the Americans keep looking at designs, and basically, the British actually find they have a working triple for a larger gun, a battleship caliber gun, quite early on, but they don't implement it because they're always the decision of, shall we make a triple of the existing gun, or shall we make a twin of the larger gun? And that's almost sort of the backup procedure going on. Now, I would say myself, if I had been designing battlecruisers, I would have probably been tempted to push for the triple, because I could save space in the hull for machinery to get more space, or I could cut the hull down and still have the same weight and still have enough guns. But that wasn't the decision the British made. The advantages of a triple turret are it probably sits about the sweet spot. The twin is the most survivable because you have the most of them to have the same number of guns, and it's the easiest to put in the space for dealing with the managing the guns. Once you've got up to a quadruple, it's starting to get very, very crowded in a turret.
Yes.
And this is basically the problem with the King George V's, and why I don't like them, and why Admiral Henderson, who was the third Sea Lord, kept having arguments with Admiral Chatfield, who was the first Sea Lord in the 1930s when they're designing him, because Henderson, who's Vice Admiral, this third Sea Lord, is going, we should be going for triple 15-inch guns, triple 15-inch guns, and then we have 9 15-inch guns, and it'll be fine. And no, Chatfield keeps going, no, we'll go for 14-inch, we're going to try and have 12. Eventually they cut down to 10. And you sit there and ask yourself, well, hang on, does 10 14-inch guns really sound better than 9 15-inch guns?
No.
And yes, it is one more gun better, but again, if you'd had an auto-loading system, which again, me and Drac have discussed before, and there were various papers around, maybe it would have been worth it, but it didn't exist. So there is problems that sort of go in, and the quadruple turret is by far and away the most complicated of all the turrets to try and put together.
Yep.
So usually I would say twin is the most simple. It starts to make sense, but triple does have advantages. Triple does have a lot of advantages, and it's one of the reasons why, especially in terms of efficiency, why Nelson and Rodney are triple, and why it's so annoying when you look at some of the battlecruiser designs. Because again, there's the whole fact that we mentioned already that there was this Hood design put together for the Americans, which had 12 16-inch guns, 4 triple turrets, right?
Yep.
Sounds like sounds like an interesting design. Hang on, why is the British guy coming with it? Because that same British guy tried to get for a design of Hood, which would have had 4 triple turrets.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go through because the Royal Navy goes, oh, we have the twin turrets, we can build it. This is going to be far quicker to build because we have that all ready to go. But there again, then you put there, if you had Hood appear with 12 15-inch guns, as Drac has already mentioned, the US Navy was already having a minor consumption fit over the existence of Hood when they were comparing them to her ships. If she'd had 12 15-inch guns, what do we think their reaction to their thoughts of the survivability of the Colorado class would have been versus her?
Well, they wouldn't be happy campers.
Drac?
The thing, well, I mean, they probably just would have thrown their. You probably would have seen a proper table flip circa 1919. But just looping back to what Prince Blip was saying earlier, when we're talking naval terms, right, a 4-inch gun sounds small and pathetic, and indeed it is when you're talking in capital ship terms. It's not a small weapon.
Yeah,
You're still talking about a gun that is considerably larger than anything that would be mounted on a tank until the middle of World War II. So this isn't a case of, as Prince Philip said, you've got, sorry, not Prince Philip, Killer Bin. Sorry, I'm getting people mixed up. As Killer Bin said, if you can't get to the middle, it's not a case of, someone can squeeze in sideways and maybe shove a shell down there. This is a 105 millimeter shell. It's not going anywhere fast unless you've got the space and the room to maneuver. And the last thing you want is a free wandering shell on your deck.
Yes.
Especially when you're trying to maintain an exceptionally high rate of fire. I mean, you look at the I looked at one point. If you look at the gun spacing and overall layout of the 444 versus the twin 5-inch 38 that the Americans would later use to great success, although the 5-inch 38 is only using 2 guns rather than 3, it actually affords more space for the individual gun crews than the 444 does.
Yep. Yeah.
I can
That's
imagine that
the space you need for a
the
high speed loading.
I can
Yes.
imagine that the side guns crews had almost as much space, but yeah, the center was.
The I guess the main disadvantage to using, at least when it comes to main battery triple turrets, especially when you see like the Nelsons and even like the Scharnhorsts and the later American ships, is fire control. Is how are you going to deal with how do you want to fire half salvos if you need a minimum of 4 guns, and how do you want to measure that and pace that out to where you still have 4 guns to go for any half salvo, and that becomes a quite a long problem with the USN and their cruiser designs. They struggle a long time to figure out how they're going to do that, and so that's the main disadvantage to a 3x3 that I can see. But the weight savings and everything else is significant for the treaty era.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
just jump in here
A
because
4x3 would fix that quite nicely.
Yeah.
true. Because there is also this like long-standing line of the German heavy ships having basically twin turrets, with the terrible twins being aberration with their triples. But that also doesn't mean that the Germans were not designing triple turrets, even if just for export. Because, for example, in Soviet archives there was a basically design sold by Germany in 1939 or 1940 for a triple gun 406 millimeter turret. So
Yeah.
that's something that wasn't really used on any of the German capital ships, except again terrible
the-
twins. But like everyone played with all designs, because if you don't want to use it, you can still sell it.
Yeah, well, for the Germans to have a twin turret on a regular size caliber for their battleships, obviously the Scharnhorst having 11-inch guns being somewhat undersized for the size of the hull. But if the Germans are going to go for 15 or something like that, you first have to persuade Krupp to get with modern times and not go with a horizontal
Yes.
sliding breech block.
Good luck with that.
Yes, that was the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was good for
Yeah.
our fathers, it's good for us.
Basically.
And our
It's totally
It
grandfathers.
was
like
good
degrees.
for
I mean, a
our
bunch-
grandfathers, it's good for us. Not it was good for our fathers. For our fathers, it was terrible.
I mean, a bunch of American ships had horizontal sliding breech blocks in World War II, but they had the good sense to turn it 90 degrees so the blocks slid vertically, so you just had to worry about a little bit of turret height rather than, acres of space on either on the side
Yeah.
of the gun.
Which
And
gun
the
was
only
this?
other odd,
These are the 6-inch guns.
Ah, okay.
yeah, the only other alternative there is the French quads,
Hmm.
where the French go, well, a full quad's complicated, so we'll just essentially bolt 2 twins together.
Yes,
Yes.
it's, the Richelieus are not really twin quad designs; they're 4 twin designs where the twins are flying in very close formation.
There was
I'm watching the chat, and I have to say there's been 2 questions which have interested me, which have popped up in the chat, which I'm going to be naughty and push in. There's
Okay.
the one that Alaska was a battle cruiser. It's just the US Navy wanted to call it a cruiser to get it through for finance reasons.
I'd
No,
go there
it
later because
wasn't.
we have that
The
also
Alaska
in the.
was.
Oh, too late.
Yeah. But I'll answer in greater detail later. But I'm just setting the chat off now before we get into it. And the other one is, if the US Navy had built the South Dakotas, would seeing Hood still be stressful for the USN? And I want to put this in because this is actually a discussion that me and Drac have had. Because we have discussed the South Dakotas a few times. And honestly, I don't think the South Dakotas, whilst they are lovely and would have been very much powerful, the USN would have had no doubt they would have won. They would have also had the same asterisks as the Colorados.
Yep.
In that their speed meant that Hood would decide when she engages.
Yeah. Hood has to choose to fight.
Yeah,
Not to mention,
Interesting.
They would have been
the
very
Sodaks
confident in
enter
South
service-
Dakota's ability to win the fight, but they would have been equally worried that Hood might just decide not to and go somewhere else and do something horrible.
Mhm.
Mm,
Hood would be able to
But-
choose where she could do horrible things. The South Dakotas would not be able to choose where they could fight out.
Yeah.
On the Alaska budget comment is the U.S. Navy essentially had an infinite check. Of course, budget was
Yeah.
a nominal concern, but would not be a reason that they would change or be changing naming or anything like this.
Yeah, I mean, the
That's
only
the
problem with Sodak Hood is if Sodak's around, G3's around.
Probably,
Or-
yeah.
God
And,
forbid for a South Dakota, N3's around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Hey,
Oh,
Tosas as well.
almost every
Probably.
armed block of steel.
Yeah,
That's
just,
when
Every-
the N. I say the N3 design process started with: here is an ingot of high quality steel. We'll give it guns and just enough power to get it mobile. Here endeth the design study.
We'll order
Uh,
four.
He's joking, but it's actually true. And the thing about the M3 is, if that had entered service, you can just imagine the Armageddon other ships would have to be built on to deal with it. With 18-inch guns and that much armor, everyone sort of going, I think we need to develop nuclear weapons about 20 years early just to
The
have a
funny thing
chance.
is, you'd
doing
end
that
up with very much of a whiplash in design, because obviously we've been talking about, Hood versus Colorado, Hood versus South Dakota. When if the N3s are around, the Japanese, as Kilobin mentioned earlier, they're going down the line of merging. You've got the Tosas and the Amagis, and then the Keys are kind of almost combined. And then by the time you get to the number 13s, they're just like, no, this is just our only design now.
Yep.
It is
Yes,
both battlecruiser
Japanese.
and battleship. So you would have then ended up with this flip around where a Hood is the faster one, and now the Japanese with the number 13s would have had the faster ship, with the N3s kind of vaguely following it around, going, "Come back here and let me kill you."
But there again, there'd also be the G3s in the world. So it'd be a case of you've got a pack of G3s coming after you, or you can go slow and deal with the basically, it would not be a nice scenario for anyone to fight. It would be N3s and G3s going, so choose the way you die now until you bring in a new generation into service.
Yeah, because you're still looking at just after World War I shell technology, and the N3s are being designed with 16 inches of belt armor at an angle, when everybody else is like the USN is still running with 13.5 inches internal vertical plate. Japan's running at 12 inches, angled on some designs or straight on others, and at Jutland even you're looking at 8-inch plate not being penetrated very well, if at all, by main caliber gun shells, and that was not even 10 years ago. So the N3s would, for a long time, would probably be very much almost invulnerable to a lot of the guns out there.
Although the moment someone would call them invulnerable, they would
They would
probably
think.
suffer something terrible. But I
Well,
mean,
no,
You
let's
see
be honest.
Yamatos turn up
yeah,
15 years earlier, because at that
Yeah.
point, N3's 55,000. To get the X, you're probably looking at going to 20s, which
Yeah.
the Royal Navy, from the reading I've done, one of the shell manufacturers in Britain said, we can make a 21-inch armor-piercing cap shell. And the Navy went, please shut up, we don't want to scare anyone.
yes.
That was Ellswick Ordnance Company.
Of course
Thank you
it
very
was.
much. Intimidating the world since 1800, from the 1800s.
They were like, if this gets out, we're trying to have the conference, and we go, oh, we could do this. No one's going to believe us.
Ellswick,
And the 20 to 21 inch is kind of, that's the caliber where you start seeing a massive drop off in rate of return for fire. It's often one of the reasons why I say, realistically, you might have seen a few 20-inch gunships, but I think everyone would have reverted to 18 pretty quickly, because you at the other end of things, 8-inch, 9.2 inch is the really upper end where you can get kind of cruiser rates of fire. Then you get to 10-inch and it drops off to battleship rates of fire, about 2 rounds a minute if you're lucky. And then once you get up to 20 to 21 inch, you're starting to look at 1.5 to 1 round a minute in peacetime. Which, okay, fair enough. In wartime, guns that are supposed to be able to do 2 to 2.5 rounds a minute are doing 1 round per minute. But if you follow that trend, if you had a 20 to 21 inch armed ship, chances are you're now beginning to approach some of the sort of 1870s, 1880s ironclads in terms of we're now measuring it in minutes per shell instead of shells per minute.
Yep.
And also, you have to consider where would it end up, and it's probably going to end up something like a 12, 18-inch gun ship with 4 triples. In which case, that's pretty much Armageddon in a boat.
Yeah. Just to pick up on something very quickly, Big Call Mark 1 asking on Twitch if the K3 and J3 are part of the Admiral class battlecruisers. No, they are part of a set of design studies that the Royal Navy was doing in the early 1920s. So I call them the alphabet series because they started in the middle of the alphabet. So they had K and L. K is the battlecruiser, L is the battleship. And then for most of the designs, you have a subvariant 2 and subvariant 3, and that signifies whether they're running with twin turrets or triple turrets. So you have K2, K3, L2, L3, and then they diverge. So the battleships go down the alphabet, so you get M2 and M3, N2 and N3, N3 being the one they eventually choose to build, if not for Washington, and then going back up the alphabet from K, so that's where you get J's, H's, G's, etc., all of I's as well. All of those are battlecruiser designs, most but not all of which have a 2 and a 3, a twin and a triple variant.
Yeah, I believe this is supposed to represent the J3,
Yes.
what we will be having as a rook. And I mean, you can see kind of similar shape with the hood, I would say.
Yeah, because
But,
J3 is
it's
more of a
also-
rational hood.
Yeah. J3 is basically Hood. It's an amalgam of Hood Battle and Battlecruiser 1919 with triple turrets instead of twins.
Yeah. And then like K2 and K3, I often describe them to people as K2 is super hood, take hood's general form, upscale it to take 18-inch guns. That's K2. Then K3 with the triples I tend to call super duper hood. Because now you're putting 9 18-inch guns on a hood-style hull.
Yeah.
Yes, just
And then
because you decided that actually having 8 was just not quite enough, the 9th makes it a cherry.
And then someone looks at how long they are and how wide they are and how much
Yeah.
they're going to cost and realizes that there's basically 1 or 2 shipyards, 1 or 2 dockyards in the UK that can service them and nothing overseas can. And then thus starts the endless quest to try and find something big enough and mean enough to tick the boxes, but also small enough and compact enough that it will actually, fit in anywhere other than the British dockyards. And bear in mind, they've
which
got
is
to be
why-
down
Which is what leads to the
Gibraltar
efficient
and
ship
Malta and
project, and
Ceylon.
of course, what leads to the efficient ship project, and what leads to Nelson and Rodney and those sort of things under the Washington Treaty. Although I will always, forever and a day, say we went for the wrong one. We should have gone for the F3 design. As much as I do actually like Nelson and Rodney, we should have gone for the battlecruiser sort of fast battleship almost sign.
F3.
Yeah, which would have been roughly 25 to 28 knots. If it had got the 28 knot one, that would have been actually a fast battleship. And
It was
that
faster
would have-
than that.
Yeah, I think it was 28, 29. I think F3 was looking.
With triple
I know
triple
they like
15
to,
inch.
I tend to track it down because I think once they'd got through it, probably wouldn't have been
Yeah.
quite fast as they liked to.
But like,
But
yeah,
yeah,
as we
fine.
say with the dimensions of like some of these like K3 and I3 are ridiculously huge designs for the Royal Navy. Ships that even today we don't come close to in terms of dimensions, and it's like often with US ships, it's the Panama Canal that's often given as like why the ships are the size they are. They have to fit in the locks. For the Royal Navy, it was we have bases all over the world, and we need to make sure the ships can fit in them. And the Navy was unwilling to rely on private yards.
Yeah.
So, which is why you see the sort of hood being like not the absolute maximum the Navy was willing to go for, but generally hood scale ships are the hard cap of what the Navy is willing to seriously look at.
Yeah, and I absolutely love there's a picture of Hood under construction. It's just her hull's been built at that point. and it emphasizes just how close to the edge she was, because normally almost all dockyards in the UK follow the same pattern. And if you go to Portsmouth or you go to Chatham these days, you can see this. And they'll have a slipway, and then at the end of the slipway there'll be a broad walk, which will be, you'll have space for people to work around the bow of the ship. It will have usually a couple of light railway tracks and a road, usually a twin lane road, so all sorts of vehicles and trains and everything can bring stuff back and forth, so it's quite a wide area. And then at the back of that you've got the buildings, the dockyard buildings.
Yeah.
So here's Hood on the slipway. Her hull occupies the entire slipway, projects over this entire massive broadwalk area, forming a gigantic metal tunnel or bridge. And then the bow is slotted neatly between two of the buildings on the back. And then when you see another shot of, which is, I suppose someone went up in a very tall crane to take a look at it, and you realize that not only is she massively overextending past the end of the slipway, she's also being built on that particular slipway because the entire shipyard is on a river, and that particular slipway is directly opposite a tributary. They can't build her on any of the other slipways because if they did, she'd smash into the far riverbank on launch.
Yep.
She has to be launched down that particular run, and this is the kind of limitations that, I mean, everybody's coming up to, as Killabin said. The Americans have got the Panama Canal to worry about. The Germans have got the Kiel Canal, which is more than wide enough, but actually at the time relatively shallow, which is one of the reasons why the Bismarck is so beamy, to keep the draft down. The French are just panicking over the fact that most of their infrastructure is mid-19th century or earlier, so they end up having to build ships where they're not actually attaching the bow or the stern and attaching it post-launch. And the Japanese in some ways are actually the best off because they started their modernization the latest of everybody, so they've got more, proportionally speaking, more larger slipways and dock spaces, although not that many because they are,
and they're launching essentially into the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
Yes,
launching
which
into
also
massive
helps.
bays, basically.
and because they're also building relatively fewer ships, if someone turns around obviously later on and says, we're going to build the Yamato, like, okay, we'll build a couple of massive covered dock slips for them because that's all they need to do. They don't have this concern of canals to work with, or shipbuilding infrastructure that's mostly 2 centuries old, or multiple overseas bases to account for. It's literally just, can we build a slip or a dock that can accommodate the ship? If yes, great, because we can then use that to maintain them later on.
Yeah. So, actually, I was checking the pre-recorded questions from the survey, and it seems that during our rambling discourse, we covered most of them, actually. Because we went there, but there are some that are bound to cause some fun drama. So let's start with the first. In the long term, which nation did you think had a better handle on what a good battlecruiser should be? Stronger guns but weaker armor, or stronger armor but smaller caliber guns? From Fatola.
Hello, Fatola. I seem to remember I said I would do this question. And I seem to remember my comment was something along the lines of, this is going to be fun because there's the US and Russian designs versus a Royal Navy, Imperial Japanese Navy, and Kaiserlich Marine builds. So, and can someone check to see if I actually did remember that correctly? Because I was dyslexic if I did.
Yes,
so
yes,
right.
you did.
Yep.
You put it verbatim.
Kaiserliche Marine, not Kaiserlich Marine.
Kaiserlich Marina, thank you. Right then. So, here is the thing. The Russians have a fairly good idea of their battlecruiser design for what they want them to be. And they are an Italian design with British turbines and all sorts of things in, but they are a pretty good battlefield hot rod for the Russians for what they need. And the trouble is with battlecruisers is you have to design them for what you are, the scenario you are in. If you gave the British battlecruisers to the Germans, they would not fit their needs. They will not fit their infrastructure, but they also will not fit their needs because the Germans, where do they have to go? They have to get out through the North Sea. Before they can go anywhere, they have to actually have a fight. So they can't afford anything like the Indefatigables. They can't afford anything like the Invincibles. They can't afford those sort of generation of battlecruisers because they just can't operate them. They can't use them. For Britain, they make perfect sense because Britain is going, well, straight out on the Atlantic. We have all these bases around the world. We want to cruise, and we can afford to withdraw from anywhere where there's a battle fleet until our own battle fleet arrives and crushes that battle fleet. So you always have to compare a battle cruiser not against really each other and go, you know what, this battle cruiser is better than that battle cruiser is. We have to look at the battle cruiser, the ethos behind its design, the strategy behind its design, and how well it fits their national needs. Now, in those, I can get into trouble because I would say actually the Renown and Repulse fitted the Royal Navy's needs almost better than Hood did. And actually, there is part of me which would have preferred almost have a couple more Renowns than Hood. Because Hood is a great status and a great statement and is a really lovely ship as a battlecruiser, but she's one large ship and there are very limited yards you can support her in, as we've already been over. There are various issues which we can support it. We can talk it over. It's difficult to be supported. For the US, okay, I can be rude about the Lexingtons. I really can be. But you again have to ask, what are they building them for? They're building them for the Pacific. They're building them not to go and fight Congos, because if they were, they're going to get into trouble. They're building them for reconnaissance and presence. They're building them so that they can run around and make sure that the battle fleet knows where it's going to go. Because basically, the American battle fleet is supposed to be this huge, overwhelming force. And when they're putting their fleet together, they're talking about the scout fleet, they're talking about the battle fleet, they're talking about the various operations. The scout fleet finds the enemy. The battle fleet will fix them. In that they'll fix their position, then they'll fix it so they don't cause anyone any trouble. And so that is what the US is building around, in which case you can say, in a way, the Lexingtons do fit that idea. And do fit it moderately well. And it goes back to what Drax said earlier at the beginning of the show and the discussion. If a ship ends up fighting the battle it was designed for, it tends to do pretty darn well. When ships get into trouble is when they're doing things which they weren't designed for, which does fit with a question which has come in on the chat I've seen, and a few other ones, which is basically what happened to Hood. And I'm going to hand that one over to Drac, because not only have I been working with Drac and listening to him talk about this and him working about Hood for a good 3 years now. Last week, we were at a very interesting defense conference, and we had a lot of fun, and it was all modern equipment, and it was the naval defense leaders. It was a really good conference. We had a lot of interesting time, and also I would say the quality of food there was absolutely fantastic. I can say this because if Drac manages to go through his discussion of Hood and talking about it without mentioning the giant burger he produced for himself in great detail, I'll be surprised. But while we were there, we ended up having talk with people from various companies and actual serving naval officers and people who had been serving naval officers and industry specialists talking about Hood and what happened to her and why she was sunk. And it starts off with, she's fighting a fight which she's not supposed to be. Because her thing was supposed to be, if she comes across a battleship that has more armor than her and equivalent firepower, well, she can outrun it. So she shouldn't be fighting it. But secondly, well, Drac has a very good theory, and I'm going to now pass it over to him.
Right, so, for those of you who've seen my video on why HMS Hood, or how HMS Hood was destroyed, you already have a little bit of a handle on this. But, to be fair, a lot of that video is myth-busting the ways she wasn't destroyed. Now, with Hood, my theory is you could call it a design fault, but not necessarily one that could be foreseen. Now, as Dr. Clark said, while we were at the conference, we spoke with a Royal Navy navigator, and while I was in the States, I also spoke with a number of both active and former US Navy personnel who were either navigators or navigator instructors, So, these are the people where lives depend on their ability to know what a ship does when it's maneuvering. And all of them, universally to a man, will back up the following statement. So when you put a ship's rudder over, especially a large ship, but to be honest, even if you're on a narrowboat on the Norfolk Broads, the ship does not turn instantly. It might do these days if you've got bow thrusters, but with a ship with a rudder, there is a fairly significant delay between when you put the rudders over and when the ship starts to turn. Now, paradoxically, thanks to physics, also when it starts to move, it doesn't move in the direction you want it to. So initially, if you say put the rudders over to port, the ship will actually make a very slight turn to starboard after continuing in a straight line for a while, and then it will commence its big port turn. And this is found in every single US Navy and Royal Navy ship handling manual as well. And I've looked through them. I've got ones from the late 19th century all the way through to the 1950s. They all describe this, the ship goes forward, will keep going forward, then will eventually start to turn. So that's item one. Second thing is that because if you imagine a ship's turned to port, so the rudder is now projecting a column of water to its port side. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That's acting on the rudder, which is fairly low down in the ship. Another effect that a ship has, if you, let's say in the case of Hood, we're putting the rudder over to port, she actually heels inwards to port, thus exposing more of her starboard side, before she commences the actual turn, and then inertia takes over and she heels outwards, which is what large ships do when they go into a turn. So a ship will heel, in a port turn, will heel over to starboard, but it will initially do a slight heel to port first. So with all that in mind, my theory comes down to the fact that the other unbreakable item of physics is that a ship kicks up a bow wave. When it kicks up a bow wave, any wave there where there is a crest, there must also be a trough. Look at any photo, or almost any photo, because sea conditions sometimes mitigate this, but almost any photo of Hood, or one of the Splendid Cats, or one of the Congos, because they all have very similar hull profiles, or even Renown and Repulse. When they're moving at speed, you see a crest from the bow wave, and then you see a trough. You actually see this on anything. I can show you pictures of US pre-dreadnoughts with bow wave and trough. I can show you pictures of Richelieu with a bow wave and trough. Any ship has this because it's physics, but the ships within the sort of related family of battlecruiser hull designs that Hood is part of, universally to a ship have a trough show up 2/3 of the way down the ship, just forward of the aft main guns, around the area of the mainmast on Hood. Now, the last bit is timing. Hood, when she went down, was flying 2 blue, the signal to turn to port. Ted Briggs, who was on the bridge, says that Admiral Holland had just given the order to execute when everything went to pieces. The other guys who survived mentioned that they felt the ship begin to turn. So put that all together, 2 blue was still flying, so it's not been hauled down yet. It actually narrows down the time of Hood's destruction to within a few seconds, because it had to have come at a time that we know from the wreck the rudders were over. So we know the rudders had been put over. That is, if you're the navigation officer, the admiral says, right, execute the turn to port, you put the wheel over pretty much immediately. So that's why the rudders are over to port. That obviously starts vibrations, and the ship starts to move slightly, so that's why everybody else feels that we're turning. We're not entirely sure how far through. The order, however, has not reached, in the space of a few seconds, hasn't reached the flag deck where they should haul down 2 blue, which is then still flying when Bismarck shell arrives. So there's this very narrow window between the order to execute being given and that order reaching the flags. In that time, because of all the stuff we've mentioned before, it's incredibly likely, barring some very weird sea states, that Hood would have had a trough running about where her mainmast is, which is exactly where Prince of Wales saw a hit come in. She would also have actually been heeling slightly to port because she's beginning her turn, thus exposing even more of her starboard side. Between those two, and the fact that she's a World War I era design where her belt runs relatively shallow under the waterline, it's incredibly likely that in those split seconds, maybe a weak point of maybe 3 or 4 seconds max, she was exposing enough of her hull, underwater hull, around about where the mainmast was, on her starboard side, that a shell from Bismarck could come in and punch clean underneath the armor belt without really interacting with any of the water, probably punching into the aft machinery space, then punching into the 4-inch magazine behind it, setting off the 4-inch magazine, which is directly adjacent to the 15-inch magazine. And that's why you get the big flare up of fire that's reported first, which is the 4-inch magazine going up, venting through the machinery space through the uptakes. And then as that pressure builds to an overpressure that can't be vented through the hole, it collapses the bulkheads into the 15-inch magazines, and thus you get the subsequent main explosion that takes out Hood.
Yep.
It all makes sense. It all adds up from a physics perspective, and from a circumstantial perspective, and it takes account of every scrap of evidence, both from Prince of Wales and from all 3 of Hood's survivors. The sad irony of it is it's literally something that would have occurred in a fraction, maybe 4 or 5 seconds maximum. It's an absolute 1 in a million shot. And it's a shot that basically, for newer ships, wouldn't have mattered, because in the early 1920s, diving shells were discovered with things like the Emperor of India tests in Britain and a number of other tests that the Japanese did. So King George V, North Carolina, etc., Iowa, if they were doing this, all of their armor belts are deeper, so they would have caught the shell. And anything designed in World War I, where you've got the shallower armor belts, most of the ships couldn't go that quickly, so they wouldn't have generated quite as big of a trough. And the few that could, Congo, Renowns, they didn't have thick enough belt armor for it to even matter. For a Congo or a Renown, a Bismarck 15-inch shell arriving in board would have punched straight through their main armor belt. It didn't matter where they were, really. Yeah. It's only with Hood that she has this unique combination of an old school armor belt design, but it's thick enough to make a difference if a shell comes in, but she's also fast enough to generate a weak spot, and then she generates this weak spot. So sorry that's a little bit of a long one, but I am actually planning on writing a journal article about it as well, but it seems to be the only thing that works and accounts for all the evidence in my mind. You can make other arguments about her being further through her turn, but the further through the turn you progress Hood, the more and more of some of the evidence you have to disregard, which doesn't seem like a safe approach to me.
Counter question. Have you read the 2019 article by Nathan Okun about the Hood destruction? So
the one on NavWebs?
Yeah, that one.
That's written by Bill Jurans.
Oh, that is Bill Jurans? There's one by Okun as well.
If we're thinking about the same article on NavWebs, I think it's authored by Bill Jurans. And I did actually consult with him while I was making my video.
Right. You did.
So I sent. We had quite a few interesting back and forths. Going over fine details and everything. And so that's where we kind of collaborated, and I did acknowledge that in the video. The only thing that basically I would say when I write a journal paper about it that I need to add, which I didn't account for in the original video, is that slight tilt to port, which is something I only discovered talking in the last couple of months to ships navigational officers, who of course are on large ships when they make the turn, so they experience this.
I mean, it makes sense.
It's like there are some of the questions which go around and some of the ideas. This is the one that's just sort of popular in some areas at the moment, is the idea of a shell somehow penetrating the 15 inches of armor on a forward turret. And I was sitting there, I've been sitting there thinking about that, and I'm going, considering it's angled and it's the way it's armored, that for Bismarck to have achieved that, it would have to been so close. It would have been at point blank range, and that would have mean it would have been a point blank range with Prince of Wales as well, which means Prince of Wales would have been pouring 14-inch shells into it, because all the targeting issues it was having wouldn't have been a problem. It would have been that close. It would have been point gun, general direction, blast.
And a turret fired as she was going under.
Yeah, that's the thing. Basically,
and you think Ted Briggs would have noticed a hit to the forward turrets?
And it doesn't explain why there's a massive flare of fire around the mainmast, which for reference, is the aft mast
Yes.
on Hood.
Yeah.
And
Forward
that's
aft
also
I suppose it's sort of the idea is the shell penetrates the forward turret and goes into the ship and goes all the way through the ship and sets a fire off at the stern.
What's it made of? Unobtainium and fired from a railgun.
And a
Yeah.
dead fuse.
I have-
Deal.
I have no idea. It's just it's one of those things which goes around the internet. It's one of those stories which come up, and I sit there and go, it sounds so cool and attractive. I can see why people are drawn to it, but once you look into reality, you're going, oh, that's not going to work.
There's also the good old Prince Eugen arguments, which seem to ignore the fact
Yes.
that she was firing high explosive at the time.
Yes.
Oh, of
Okay.
course, that's magic. It's magic high explosive. It's from Prince Eugen. Of course,
Well,
it's magic high explosive.
Never mind the fact that even when I ran the numbers, even if you want to penetrate, if you want to set up a scenario in which an 8-inch shell from Prince Eugen's gun is even physically capable of penetrating Hood's deck armor, you basically have to fire it like a mortar, which, spoiler alert, Prince Eugen's gun turrets were physically incapable of doing.
Yeah. So the article I was bringing up that I remember reading posited that based off of face hard calculations, which is Okun's like powerful armor penetration calculator based on USN discoveries, you could, if Hood was 45 degrees through the turn, or 45 degrees in incidence to Bismarck, which is not through the turn, sorry, you could penetrate the upper belt amidships where the ship is wider and has a little greater distance between the turtleback and the outer edge of the belt. And you could then hit the angled portion of the turtleback from that shell at about 10 degrees drop. And end up basically at the same place, exploding right at the end or aft end of the engine room, right in front of the 4-inch magazine. And so
Okay, yeah, that I have read. I don't think I've necessarily read his article on it, but I have read other things that espouse a similar kind of approach. It's physically possible, certainly. The only caveat I put on it is that for the angle to work, Hood has to be a decent way through her turn.
Yeah.
And the thing that doesn't work at that point is, why is 2 Blue still flying?
Yeah.
Because if 2 Blue is still flying, it means Hood's basically must be right at the beginning of her turn, or Admiral Holland has suddenly morphed into Admiral Beatty and isn't bothering to tell Prince of Wales what to do. Which runs into another problem, of course, that Prince of Wales, as we know from her accounts, when Hood explodes, has to maneuver to avoid the wreck.
Yeah.
If Hood had begun a 20-degree turn to port without telling Prince of Wales, their courses would have diverged. So Prince of Wales would have just bypassed Hood's wreck because they would have been on separate lines of advance at that point.
Yep.
The only way it works for Hood to be partway through her turn is for 2 Blue to still be flying, Holland to have taken complete leave of his senses, Ted Briggs's account to not actually make any sense when he says Admiral Holland had literally just said to execute the turn when the ship was hit, and also it would require Prince of Wales, possibly the most believable part of that, to be following Hood regardless of what Hood was actually signaling.
Yeah.
Which maybe, but the rest of it doesn't make a lot of sense. So it's one of those things of like, yeah, physically possible assuming these circumstances, but getting to those circumstances is less plausible, at least to me, based on the total collection of evidence.
Right, because the main thing is, if you do this hit at the magazines, you're not getting through the deck armor.
Yeah.
No.
Because the midships, the deck armor doesn't cover the entire width of the ship, only the top of the turtle deck.
Yeah.
And so they have that gap there, which makes it in theory possible at certain angles. But again, it's these sorts of things we'll never really know.
No.
But
In short,
the evidence
in
lines
short,
up
Hood
more
was
with
bloody
Drax.
unlucky.
Yeah.
Yes.
In all situations. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about it is that actually, for all the fact that myself and the article by Bill Jurens might disagree with Nathan Okens on the mechanics of how, the interesting thing is we've both come up with exactly the same end state,
Right.
i.e. the shell is, we're all agreeing the shell fetches up in the 4-inch magazine and it's from Bismarck, and that sets off a chain explosion that destroys Hood. neither of the theories allows for any of the more outlandish ones, like torpedo warheads exploding and so on and so forth.
Right.
And let's be honest, if Hood had been modernized, guess what would have been moved? The 4-inch magazine.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, they were ironically, as originally built, there was actually a gap between the secondary magazines and the 15-inch magazine that was used for general stores when it was a 5.5-inch magazine. The whole thing had been ripped out, renovated, and expanded for 4-inch rounds when they refitted her with 4-inch and took away the 5.5s. But yeah, if she'd been refitted again, she would have had 4.5-inch, which have their own specific mountings, their own specific feed systems, and would have had the magazine layout revised yet again.
And she'd have been going a bit faster anyway, because her machinery would have been overhauled, so she would have been in a different place. And it's Hood and Bismarck are the World War II kings of the what-ifs. What if Hood turns later? She turns sooner. What if Bismarck dodges? What if the torpedo doesn't detonate?
It's in the words of Scotty from Star Trek. It's like shooting a bullet with another bullet while riding a horse wearing a blindfold.
Yeah.
It's the perfect
For
shot.
Bismarck, if the torpedo doesn't detonate and she's moving faster, that means she runs into 4th destroyer flotilla with Pirwin earlier in the day.
Probably.
That's not a good scenario for Bismarck. 4 tribal class destroyers and ORP Pirwin. Let's be honest, with daylight, they cause enough trouble at night in a box formation, attacking her all night to keep her awake and not allow her to sleep, and not allow her to get away. If she runs into them during daylight hours, that is not a good scenario. It's not.
Thanks for the detailed...
5 destroyers, including Pirwin, who would probably do a kamikaze run if she thought it would take out the Bismarck. Is not a good scenario for the Bismarck under that suit. She gets damaged, whatever. She isn't. That probably just means she spends the night floating around with holes in her hull, going, at best, going, please, please sink me now before the battleships turn up.
Yeah, I prepared some pictures here. So to demonstrate what Drach was saying about the depth of the side belt on the Hood versus the
Should be noted,
newer fast battleships.
On Hood, there is an additional belt underneath the main belt. There's a 4-inch strip, basically, of armor that's underneath the main belt. That's sort of an underwater protection layer that you have to avoid if you're doing a diving shell hit. But if it's lifted out of the water, then the shell can go right through it.
Yeah.
So,
while here on the King George V, you can see that basically the thicker part, the belt actually goes deeper.
Much deeper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the Royal Navy at that point were designing with Japan in mind, and Japan was considered the absolute bee's knees of the diving shells. According to intelligence, they were considered being obsessed with it, and that's also one of the reasons. When the Yamatos are heard about, there is quite a lot of worry in some of the circles, especially even some of the American battleship circles, as to what exactly an 18-inch, etc., or 17.5-inch, some of them were thinking, diving shell would do to them. Whether it would be able to penetrate the lower belts.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, a shell that size hitting you that low it's like a torpedo hitting you, but it's worse.
Yeah, and the Americans aren't going to be thinking about this until 43. So whatever they have designed is they don't have any chance to fix. So
no.
Yeah, as they discovered with the North Carolinas taking torpedoes.
Yeah.
Yep.
They were like, the torpedo defense just held, and they were like, "Oh, they're using much bigger warheads than we expected."
And that was a submarine torpedo.
Yeah.
He's like, "Let's try not to get hit next time."
Yes.
It works. It's an idea. It's a theory to have. Let's try not to get hit.
Well, if you look at the at some point I think I put it in a dry dock as well. But when I do my video on North Carolina, they've actually got the damage control, chart from that hit up in the ship as a museum ship. it's worrying how close it's literally flooded area. What's next to the flooded area? The main magazine. That is how close North Carolina came to going pop.
Yep.
To the point that actually the order to prepare to abandon ship was given on North Carolina immediately after the torpedo hit, because they thought there was a small chance that the magazine might be about to blow. So they were very much on the edge. Obviously, they were on the right side of the edge, which was good news for everybody. But it's it's one of those things that people sometimes don't appreciate. It's very bizarre, actually, that whole torpedo spread, because you have a fleet carrier Wasp, admittedly not the world's most well-protected fleet carrier, that goes up like a Roman candle. You have the North Carolina that very nearly goes up like a Roman candle, even though it's a modern fast battleship. And then you have the destroyer O'Brien, which eats another long lance, well, a submarine-launched variant thereof, and almost makes it home. There's never any risk of the thing blowing up, but it just eventually suffers structural failure when it's almost back to Pearl Harbor, which is a bit tragic, but it's also slightly weird.
Yes, that was definitely a very, very successful salvo. To speed things up, because we are already at 2 hours runtime. Another explosive question. During World War II, what was the role of the battlecruiser? The fast battleship seems to have replaced most of the roles within the battle fleet, and there seems to have been little need for them in battling cruisers, which leaves little for them to do.
Early part of the war, the British battlecruisers and the French Dunkirks and such are arguably the only Allied capital ships that can catch the twins. And any of the commerce raiders, if the Hippers or the Deutschlands make a break for it. So in the early part of the war, before the treaty era fast capital ships start entering service, they are your fast capital ships. They're protecting commerce, going after raiders.
They get organized that way too.
Yeah, and it's in that period when the majority of them are lost.
Yes.
Repulse goes down right at the end of this sort of Allied lack of fast capital ship era. The King Georges are just coming online. The North Carolinas are working up. The South Dakotas are months away. Hood goes down again because the Royal Navy is stretched for fast capital ships. They've got plenty of the slower ones, the R's, the QEs, the Nelsons, but May 41, you've got King George V, Prince of Wales, and Hood. When the Germans are, in theory, in worst case scenario, sitting on 4 fast capitals.
Yes, and the
Italians are also sitting on their Littorios. So in the early part of the war, the Axis have the advantage in fast capitals.
Yeah.
So the battlecruisers have to be used.
The Vichy French theoretical have the Richelieu and potentially Jean Bart.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah,
that's
and
still
Dunkirk
under
and Strasbourg
construction,
once they
but
finished, Dunkirk
definitely.
off the seabed.
And the American fast battleships are not out of the dockyard yet, so that's...
Yeah, North Carolina doesn't work, really.
Washington either.
Washington is better.
she works as long as she sails slow.
Yeah.
Stay below 25 knots and you're fine.
I've seen the documentation of, like, we think we can go past the 25 knots, but we have to, like, prepare the dentist to deal with filling losses. Because she shakes violently.
Yeah.
Which must be really weird being in a 30... Well, by that time she's, 38,000 tons?
Yeah.
And she's just shaking.
Yeah. For extra fun, when I was on North Carolina, one of the larger mess decks is aft over the props.
Oh, God.
And half of the room is sloped, which is great if you're there just visiting, because you can kind of ski down on your shoes down the mess deck. But I can't imagine what that would be like with the vibration, the shaking, the noise, while you're desperately trying to eat some food and basically being vibrated down and get up against a set of bulkheads like you're in a penny arcade.
Yeah. So...
Luckily,
and then Renown, like Renown spends most of the war. She scares the twins off, but I think that's more a case of the Germans not wanting to take the engagement. They don't need to take the engagement. They've done what they needed to do off Norway,
Well,
and the concern that repulses around.
Hits.
Yeah,
She
and
does-
Renown does hit her.
The thing is, if they felt that they could hit her and she wasn't hitting them, they probably would have maybe gone, well, we can do this for the glory of she's so. But
Yeah.
at long range, she's suddenly banging them down, and they're going,
Mm.
hang on, why is she so annoyed with us? She looks like she's motivated by vengeance. And they didn't see. I done this whole discussion on my channel. I said, that's why they had one of her destroyers had been sunk earlier in the day. Glowworm had been attached to her. Admittedly, it was by Hipper, but it is a sort of scenario where the mummy ship has lost one of her little ships, and she's out to take revenge on anyone who might have been responsible.
Oh, absolutely. Renown chases them through a North Sea storm.
Yeah.
Yes, at full speed, and is hitting them regularly with her 15-inch guns. It's it's not a good scenario for you if you're Sharnhorst. Sharnhorst would probably think, well, we can normally take her on a good day, but it seems to be that she's having a very bad day for us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we prefer to be elsewhere.
I did read a translation of an action report of, I think, Scharnhorst, sea turret commander in the engagement, and it was a sad reading. Basically, it was a litany of things breaking due to the bad weather and water flooding in, and the remote power control to main director breaking down. And the biggest highlight of that he mentioned was that for one, he was able to observe the enemy only half of the time because the second half was spent fixing broken things. And that he highlighted that despite the weather, the enemy was able to maintain steady rate of fire, unlike his own turret. So that's
Yeah, it's something when it's the almost the 25, 30-year-old veteran maintaining contact and fire and speed in the rough weather, and the two new kids on the block are going, hang on, why is everything breaking around us?
Granted,
Is fate not with us? Is something not liking us?
granted, the
Has someone decided?
the kids are about what 4,000 or 5,000 tons overweight by this point.
yeah.
Yes.
It's not
And
fun.
the sea itself dislikes them. I believe
Yes.
it's Scharnhorst that reports the shell casings that are ejected from her forward turrets get kicked up into the aft plane of the ship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 11-inch brass casings are like raining over the aft part of the ship as she's moving at speed and shooting. And I guess the other part is the Congos get used. Well, the Congos get used because the Japanese aren't willing to risk their main battle line in anything other than the be-all and end-all. And the Congos show that despite their very heavy modernization, I think you could only argue the Italian battleships modernizations are more comprehensive. Two of them get used up. What was it? Haruna gets beaten to death slowly by
Here.
He gets beaten to death at night and then finished off, and by US cruisers and destroyers that got so close they were exchanging 20mm and 40mm anti-aircraft fire. Yes.
We do need a book like this on the Congo, because we've got this for
Yeah.
the Italian battleships. It's really good for the Italian battleships. We don't have an equivalent like this for the Congo class.
Although I
At
would
At least
point
not
out
one
that
I've read.
Hiei's Spite is exactly why I still insist that the Congos were still battle cruisers. People make an argument that they're fast battleships by the time of World War II, and I just point at the armor and go, yeah.
No.
Yeah,
Hiei got beaten up by
Japanese
the
call them
8-inch armed
that.
ship.
yes.
Yeah.
The reason
But it's like
They
I
are-
can call my Volvo XC60 a Jeep. It doesn't make it a
The-
Jeep.
the reason the Congos get relabeled
Please
as
don't call your Volvo XC60 a Jeep. That thing, it would actually rebel at you. It would feel that was a slur on it. It's a tank, which is just slightly high. It is not a Jeep.
yeah the reason the Congos get reclassed as fast battleships or battleships at first is because at one point in the 1920s the Nagatos are faster.
Yeah.
And so
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
and so it's kind of embarrassing to have your battleships be faster than your battlecruisers. And so,
Or it could be considered cool. This is what
Yeah,
you could just have
that's
gone.
true.
You could just written out and gone, yeah, we're so cool. Our battlecruisers have to keep up our battleships. No, the Japanese turn around and go,
it's-
you know what? Oh, we can't be non-conforming. Our battlecruisers aren't faster than our battleships. We we have to now call them battleships because they're slow. Just because a ship comes slow doesn't make it a battleship. A battleship.
And,
Yes, battleships tend to be slower than battlecruisers, but a lot more armor needs to be added before it becomes a battleship.
yeah.
But I
And
would
then I
just
think-
quickly jump in here with also why the Congos were used, because it wasn't just because, like, yes, the Japanese Navy was keeping the battle line for the end-all be-all, but also the battle line couldn't keep up with the carriers and couldn't make the safe run to Guadalcanal,
Yes.
because that's
Yeah.
like Yamato
Oh.
could possibly burn like 1 month's supply of fuel in trying to get there and back,
Yeah.
but she would still be slower and she wouldn't get out of range of planes before the
The-
daybreak, which was crucial.
the fuel game
It's
is
the
big,
biggest
too.
potential impact of those Admiral class carriers being built rather than Courageous and Glorious is the fact that the obvious thing is that Renown, Repulse, and Hood all get upgraded prior to World War II, because if you've got 2 large fast carriers, what are your capital ships which will keep up with them? And the British have a task force policy, and when they have Ark Royal into service, she spends most of her time with Force H. She's operating with Renown or she's operating with Hood. These fast ships to keep up with her. If you have 3 such large fast carriers in service, you're going to need at least 3 such large fast capital ships to escort them. And that would have been the biggest difference. You would have had a fully upgraded and fully modernized Hood and a fully upgraded and fully modernized Repulse by the time of World War II.
Yeah, and
Sorry, I can't.
Yeah.
It's the same reason as why you have the Congos upgraded. Is because, to be honest, this is a similarity between the British and the Japanese strategy and the thing going. You need this fast group, and if your carriers are fast, then you need the fast ships to keep up with them and escort them.
yeah,
And also the other reason you're using the Congos for it is because, let's be honest, they're the sacrificial lambs. They're the capital ships the
Yeah,
Japanese Navy can most afford to lose.
and
of the ones
also
that-
can most afford to use, because they're
Yeah.
the fuel efficiency of them was superior to basically anything
Yeah.
else they had that was capital grade.
Mm.
it is if you had that little bit ability to look back, one of the like moments in history I would have loved to see is the moment Washington catches Hiroshima,
Oh yeah,
because the Japanese think that they're winning, because
Mhm.
South Dakota is just sort of going, what on earth is going on, and why does nothing work?
And why is it all on fire?
find
Yeah,
the
wh-
breaker box.
Yeah.
and
South Dakota is one of those weird ones where, she's well armored enough that she takes the battering, but I'm sure you probably found that this account, Killer Bin, where one of the guys is like, okay, all the electronics are not working, everything's not working. Right, well, we've still got our optical rangefinders in the turrets, looks through the optical rangefinders like, flames. How unhelpful. Never mind.
I think what's the famous in a few minutes, the most modern capital ship in the US Navy had been rendered deaf, blind, dumb, and impotent.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is actually a related question to this. How long could a battleship or a battlecruiser run at maximum speed versus cruising speed? I believe it's like 5 times shorter.
It depends on the ship.
Yeah.
Some ships are better optimized for high speed runs than others, and it also depends on the top speed, because something like a North Carolina, for example, it doesn't carry as much fuel as an Iowa, but South Dakota is physically smaller, so North Carolina carries proportionally more fuel than a South Dakota. So North Carolina, assuming it's not vibrating itself to pieces, running at top speed will run longer than the South Dakota does. There is actually a site out there that has transcribed almost all of the US World War II battleships' fuel consumption charts, which is quite useful. And if I remember correctly, an Iowa can run for just under a week at full speed before it runs out of fuel, if
Yeah,
it's got a full tank.
Yeah, the Iowas can run the Atlantic at full speed.
That's actually
So they can
more than I
do this like
expected.
6 and a bit days before the last
Yeah.
last droplet of fuel is exhausted.
And I believe the Hood Association website has Hood's fuel consumption at full speed of 31 and a bit knots at 3 gallons to the yard.
Okay, that's
It's an incredibly imperial unit of measurement.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
In metric, that's a lot for not very far.
Yes.
The and fuel efficiency is a good note here for going back to the World War I discussion. When you look at British or ships designed in this era, they're not talking about standard displacement where fuel is discounted from the ship's weight. And German ships or German battlecruisers and British battlecruisers are roughly the same weight for their eras, depending on the ships in question. But the difference there is British battlecruisers are going to have roughly double the effective range that the Germans have, which means they're using more fuel stowage. They also are going to need better crew accommodations, and which means that they're going to have to dedicate more of their weight for creature comforts that the Germans don't have to,
Yes.
allowing for greater displacement in armor and in other amenities.
I've actually found that chart, by the way. So in case anybody's interested, from a full tank, an Iowa class running at 14.8 knots, give or take a fraction, will be able to cover 15,600 nautical miles using roughly 2,200 gallons an hour. So it'll take 42.5 days to run out of fuel. Whereas if you run it at absolute top speed, you're now using 14,267 gallons an hour. At that point, you're going just a fraction over 5,000 miles and you run out of fuel in 6.5 days.
And also to compare German and British battlecruisers of World War One is the quality of the coal that they're using. Because British battlecruisers had the advantage of very high quality coal from Wales, to the extent that I have been informed that the High Seas Fleet's battle coal was pre-war imported Welsh coal.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
And
They're
that
good quality ones.
and that the Royal Navy could tell by how much smoke German ships were producing whether they were burning British coal or German coal.
Mm-hmm.
The German coal is brown coal, which is far less, I guess, refined, concentrated. It doesn't burn as well.
No,
So you
it's
need
less
more of
energy
it.
dense and has more impurities.
Yeah, and
Apologies for disappearing a second ago, but the water butt, which is connected to the lovely piping around, the guttering around my shed, had managed to start to fall over and was starting to pour water over my window.
Oh,
So I thought I should quickly deal that quickly.
Yeah, that's understandable emergency. So
watch the stream go as the water just starts building up.
I think very last topic, which we can't really avoid it, is just why wasn't the oversized Baltimore, aka Alaska, why it wasn't a battlecruiser?
Good. So the only
Okay.
I have a whole video about this. There's a half-hour discussion.
Shall we all quickly take a vote?
Yes.
Okay.
Who thinks it was a battlecruiser? I think that answers the question.
the only
Prince Split was considering it.
No.
Considering it.
I am very
but
much
He doesn't want to get killed.
No, I am very much in the large cruiser camp. What I was going to say is that the only similarity in terms of design between the Alaska class and a true battleship or even battle cruiser is that the Alaska class armor belt extends a deck higher than it would on a heavy cruiser in the U.S. Navy. That's the only thing. Everything else is heavy cruiser grade.
But is that a treaty confined heavy cruiser?
Yes.
Or something? It's a deck higher than that, or as the cruiser would have been if it hadn't been for the Washington and London naval treaties.
So that would be compared to the Baltimore class, which is
You'd have to.
It's a halfway house.
Sort of treaties limited.
Yeah, it's still sort of treaty.
The summary of my position nowadays, because I used to be very much in the Alaskas were a battle cruiser camp, but that was based purely on mission profile.
I'm so glad we didn't talk then, because that would have led to such an argument.
Yeah, the Alaskas basically, they are battle cruisers as far as they follow the same battle cruiser mission profile of the Invincibles and Indefatigables, i.e. hunt down and murder enemy cruisers. The problem is that whilst they are the originals, the Invincibles and Indefatigables are not the majority of battle cruisers. And in every other thing, as Prince Rip just mentioned, whether it comes to torpedo protection, armor, caliber of guns relative to the current battleships, etc., in all of those things, the Alaskas match U.S. cruiser design.
Yeah. The
So
I guess the follow-up
Yeah.
question is Dunkirk's.
they I think split the
Oh,
difference.
They're fast battleship.
I think given the armor because remember they've massively redesigned Dunkirk. Redesigned the class halfway through.
Strasbourg, yeah.
Dunkirk, as built, I think is probably just on the battlecruiser side of things, because her armor is not capable of really going toe to toe with the full size capital ships of the time. But Strasbourg, when she's redesigned with a much heavier armor protection, basically tips the line over into fast battleship. But
Yeah.
that's my personal
So-
opinion.
She is designed on a level which is honestly such a low weight comparison to such a low displacement compared to other comparative ships that you could call her a light fast battleship, but she is designed to be a battleship, not
Yeah.
a very good one, because she's designed on 17,500 tons, and let's be honest, that's not going to produce a decent ship in a world where you're talking about 60,000 ton behemoths. You are, but just because she's so small and she's so light, doesn't mean you can class her as a battlecruiser, because the French do not think they're building a battlecruiser; they think they're building a battleship. The fact it's a terrible battleship doesn't make it a. There's not a scenario where you go, because you're a terrible battleship but you're fast, you're therefore a battlecruiser. No, it's just a bad battleship.
What my thoughts on it is it's contextual. What is the French building against? So of course everybody knows that they're built to counter the Deutschlands, but also in the very front and center in the design specifications for these ships is that they have to lead the line of battle against the Italian dreadnoughts. They have to be capable of fighting an Italian dreadnought and beating it handily. And at the time that Dunkirk's laid down, none of the Italian dreadnoughts are even looking at being modernized. It's like 31, 32. And then by the time they're getting towards Strasbourg, the Italians are starting to redevelop their dreadnoughts, and they're starting to get the upgrades. And so Strasbourg needs the upper hand and is redesigned for that purpose.
So like the European
And
capital
basically,
ships.
it's this.
Yeah. But I think the European capital ships are probably one of the most direct. This led to this, led to this, led to this, led to that. Because you can argue that the sequence of events went from Deutschland to Tirpitz. With Dunkirk and Strasbourg and the Italian rebuilds and the Littorios and the Richelieus and the Bismarck and Tirpitz. And meanwhile, the Brits are going, well, that's all jolly good. Europe's building capital ships again. Oh dear, now we have to do as well.
Yep.
Oh no. Anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm afraid our time is generally up. So I would ask for the final words. Basically, if you have any cool project coming up or next stream, next video topic to announce, now's your time. So let's start with Kilbin.
I'm about to go live and play some ranked, so wish me luck.
We will. What is your favorite ranked ship?
This season, Georgia.
Okay.
Solid.
You are making your own luck then. Okay, Drach. Muted.
You're muted.
Sorry. Both myself and Dr. Clark are headed off to Canada in 4 days, which is causing me a minor panic when it comes to producing enough videos to cover me while I'm gone. So we will be seeing, of course, HMCS Hyder, HMCS Sackville, and various others. So that's the most immediate thing. And then further down the line this year, probably this, apart from gradually shifting through all the hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of video I filmed on the various US museum ships and bringing people the glorious benefits of those various vessels, I suppose the other big project I'm working on at the moment is my Battle of Trafalgar video, which will probably be released in the beginning of October, and is probably going to be the single largest, most expensive, and most thoroughly researched and documented and most guest visitors video that I've ever produced. And is probably going to have to be in 2 parts.
Yeah.
That sounds very promising. I'm looking forward to it. We had a chat about Battle of Trafalgar last year here, but this will definitely be something else.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Much
Thanks.
gunpowder has been expended in the making of this video, is all I'll say.
I don't.
My bet is it ends up being 3 parts.
Oh, so the George R. R. Martin approach.
3 or maybe 4.
Yeah.
He's been saying 2 for a while, and then he's saying they're getting very big,
Yep.
and there's going to be a lot in them.
I don't
so...
remember properly, but if you need an American voice, you got you know who to call.
Ghostbusters. And Dr. Clark.
Well, as Drax said, we're off to Canada. I go on Thursday, and it's going to be fun. We've got a dinner. There's a link somewhere floating around which has a link to the timeline of where we are, and it's on my page in the community section. There's a section there which says basically this is where we're going to be, roughly what we're doing, roughly where we are. There are hopefully going to be some more announcements about the evening stuff we've got going on. There's all sorts of things sort of we're doing, and hopefully that helps. It's how do I put this? It's going to be a fun trip. While I'm out there, though, I've actually got quite a big project coming out because I've got all my Equitable Treaty series, because I've gone through the naval treaties from Washington and London, and I've tried to put some videos together basically on how you redesign them so that instead of them being causes of World War II, they actually can, well, probably not prevent World War II happening, but maybe actually make it a smaller war and certainly make it a far less bloody war from the perspective of the Allies. Because there are lots and lots of problems in those treaties. Those treaties are basically classic treaties of how to both annoy people and cut your own nose off to spite your face. They're not good. And then, as it's the year of the cruiser, so I've just got more. I'm starting on the US cruisers as well, interwar cruisers as well with my videos. So yeah, I've got through the whole of the county class. And I'm doing all sorts of I've done all the scout cruisers for the British, and now I'm starting on the American, the Italians, the French, and various German cruisers coming out. So yeah, I'm keeping myself mildly busy.
Sounds like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Prince Blue.
And apparently the episode of War Factories, which I was in, has now come out in somewhere. Although I haven't seen it yet. So if anyone has seen me on War Factories, please do send me a link, because I'd like to see what eventually of what I said got in there, because
Okay.
they were very nice people. They had me there for 2 days chatting away, fed me lots of food, we chatted away for ages, and I have no idea what went in, but the check didn't bounce, so I was happy.
That's good. Yeah. And Prince
My
Blue.
policy, if I'm fed and the check doesn't bounce, I'm happy.
And last Friday we did a live stream on World of Warships Legends on our Twitch and YouTube, covering all sorts of nitty-gritty details about battleship armor and armor schemes, armor layouts. We're covering also Hood and Bismarck in quite large detail. This is where some of our cutouts today came from. So,
Yes.
good to
Thank
see
you
them
for providing them.
and a little more during that live stream. What we have coming up in Legends is we will be having another stream this Friday to celebrate the Platinum Jubilee, and we have the big news coming ever closer at the beginning of June.
Nice.
So
Cool. Thank you. And
And
for
do we have
general,
any ideas what our next topic is going to be?
yes, for
What
the
is it?
general next topic of the Armchair Admirals, we already have it. Because in June, okay, there's anniversary of Battle of Midway, there's anniversary of Battle of Philippine Sea, but there's also anniversary of a very large effort to resupply Malta. The operation, I always forget one of them, Operation
Pedestal.
Harpoon and Pedestal. Yeah.
Yep.
And
Are we
uh,
are we going to have to do our best to try and get Jamie on this, because that is his absolute loved topic forever.
that would be fun, but we also will be having most likely an Italian guest to talk about the
Oh.
Italian Navy bit, Navy
Excellent.
part of this. So this should be
Mhm.
interesting because, well, new guests are always fun, and yeah, should be fun. Expect more news when the time gets closer. And yes, I would like to thank all our guests today for stopping by, for sharing their knowledge. I think we talked a lot about the battlecruisers, and I hope that we managed to both entertain and educate people in the Twitch and on the YouTube. And it's been definitely fun. I learned new things. I always like this about these streams, because even on topics where I think I know quite a lot, you guys always manage to bring a lot of new stuff that then leads to me frantically Googling and searching books and stuff. And it usually hurts my wallet, but well.
Oh, there are some good books out right now.
Yeah. So yeah, I would like to thank you. And after the stream, since Killer Bin will go on streaming on his channel, I guess we shall raid him. So
Yes.
let's think of some suitable hashtag.
I need to go refill my cup of tea if that's happening.
Yes.
Better at ranked than Drac.
Oh
Which, to be
my.
fair, is not exactly difficult.
Oh,
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not even getting involved in that one.
Robin gave you some very kind words about your carrier plays, Drac, the other day. So
Oh, you dear. I'm still learning. Be kind.
no, he legitimately gave you very kind words. So
All right. That's good to know.
I think the best hashtag for today would be, is Georgia a battlecruiser?
is
I approve.
I don't like that question.
So yeah,
Why I
thank you.
like it.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone watching us. Have a nice day, and see you roughly in a month. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye. Bye.